Genau. Also dieser Typ hier, ich weiß nicht, ob ihr den kennt, das ist der Freund von Tash Peterson, der wahrscheinlich besten veganen Aktivistin der Welt. Also die ist bei mir auf Platz 1, danach kommt Raffaela. Weil die Tash, die ist noch ein bisschen härter drauf und das finde ich sehr gut. Deswegen ist die bei mir auf der 1. Und genau, dieser Typ hier, das Interessante bei dem ist, ich habe mal ein Video von dem gesehen, weswegen ich auch unbedingt jetzt auf dieses Video reagieren will. Ich habe mal ein Video von dem gesehen, wo der irgendwie gefragt wurde, ja, was mit den Tieren der Wildnis, die fressen sich ja auch. Soll man die auch aufhalten oder was? Und dann meinte der, nein, wir sollten uns da nicht einmischen. Irgendwie sowas, ne? Von daher, und hier, wenn man jetzt den Titel des Videos liest, oh, könnt ihr genau nicht sehen, und das Video heißt Vegan Gains says Vegan should kill lions. Also Veganer sollten Löwen töten. Und ja, der wird ihn wahrscheinlich ganz genau auf diesen Punkt pressen. Und ja, also seine Aussage von damals natürlich übelst cringe. Aber vielleicht hat er einfach ist noch nicht in Kontakt gekommen mit Logik. Und es hat ihn keiner auf diesen Punkt gepresst. Von daher wird Vegan Gains das wahrscheinlich hier übernehmen. Bin ich sehr, sehr gespannt. Ja, und das Video geht sehr lange. 2 Stunden. Das andere Video, was ich auch noch gucken will, geht 3 Stunden mit James Espy. Deswegen sollten wir so schnell wie möglich anfangen. Ich habe das Video auch ein bisschen beschleunigt. Ansonsten sitzen wir hier bis morgen. Und ich würde sagen, Leute, gehen wir rein in den Filmchen hier.
Alright everybody, so today...
Ich habe auch ein bisschen beschleunigt, weil Vegan Gains eigentlich ziemlich langsam redet.
I have Vegan Gains on the call. I'm going to be asking him some questions. Thanks for coming on, Richard. Can you go by
Ja, okay, das ist geht absolut in Ordnung.
Richard?
Yeah.
Gehen wir es an, so muss es lauten.
Cool. Alright, well, before we get started, I'll just get you to introduce yourself, because I'm sure there's
Schon mal gute Videoqualität, I like. Ja, Audioqualität ist auch top, das ist sehr gut.
going to be plenty of people that don't know who you are, but I'm sure there's lots of people that already do. But just a brief introduction.
Yeah, so I go by
Und ich habe die ganzen Supports von gestern natürlich da gelassen. Ich habe die nicht wieder auf 0 gestellt, weil das wäre ja komisch. Ich habe die alle da gelassen.
Vegan Gains online. I'm a vegan activist. I sort of specialize in health and fitness content, but I do a lot of other political commentary as well.
Yeah, I'd say you're quite well known for your ethical views and stuff like that. Some people would say you're a controversial figure within the vegan movement. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the controversy is sort of unwarranted. A lot of people just have sensitive...
Also da es keine Debatte ist oder so, denke ich mal nicht einfach nur ein Interview, werde ich hier auch nicht viel zu kommentieren haben wahrscheinlich. Das ist gut, weil wir dann schneller durchs Video kommen.
Beefies and they can't handle things.
Aber falls der hier irgendwie natürlich komische Takes bringt, werde ich natürlich reingrätschen.
Yeah, I think
A lot of people just have sensitive fifis and they can't handle things.
Ja, Anti-Snowflake steht bei mir im Titel, ja. Genau aus diesem Grund. Diesen verdammten Gefühlsduseleien, no one cares.
Yeah, I think both of us aren't really strangers to controversy in some way. Me working with Tash protesting, there's many things really.
Also ich habe mich nicht geirrt, das ist der Freund von ihr, ja, okay.
I mean, what do you think some of the specifics are that people point out as being controversial when it comes to us as activists, or even you more specifically?
Yeah, so I don't care if certain people die. I've been known to kind of make fun of people dying of cancer, heart disease. I don't know why I should show any sympathy to people who abuse
Ja, sowas gehe ich natürlich nicht mit.
animals and support animal abuse. Within the vegan activist space specifically, at least around Toronto, where I'm from, there's been a sort of infection of radical feminism within activist circles, and I've been totally against that, and I've been ostracized from that community for going against intersectionalism, feminism, and that crap going into vegan activism.
Krass, was? What the fuck? Ja, das Vegan Gains natürlich based as fuck, wie immer.
Sure. What would you say to people that say you're actually hindering the vegan movement?
I'd like to see evidence of that. As far as I can tell, yeah, there's a lot of people that don't like me at first, but usually when people kind of give me a chance and listen to my message a bit more, they kind of end up agreeing, or at least respecting my position.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I think at first, and I could say the exact same about Tasha's activism, being her boyfriend. I remember at the beginning, like, being hesitant with terminology, and we'll get into this.
Ja, also der Freund von Tash Peterson zu sein, ei. Alter, muss das ein harter Job sein.
Just being, oh, I don't really know if that's actually effective. But it's not until you really understand facts and what is actually logical and what is the right thing to do when you're thinking from the victim's
Logical, really?
position, I think it'll start to make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
And I think that can get into our first set of questions. So I want to organize, I have a bunch of questions. I don't know if we'll get through them all. Do you have like a deadline? You want like a cutoff time?
No, you can go as long as you want.
Sweet. Yeah, so
So sollten Debatten eigentlich gehen, so 1 gegen 1 und dann gibt's Moderator, nö. Gibt's Zeitlimit, nö. Let's go, boys.
I think what we can do is I want to start off with some questions mainly aimed at non-vegans, because if there's any non-vegans watching right now, they're probably not going to be watching to the very end, so we might as well start with them. And then we can move on to things more so aimed at vegans, some hot topics. And then I also want to ask some questions from, and I could probably play the devil's advocate of being a carnivore dieter, because this week I'm actually going to be
Lol, seine Kopfhörer, ne?
debating Anthony Chafee. Do you know him?
Yeah, I hate his guts.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, I'm actually going to be debating him in person. It's been organised for Tash and I to go in and actually, I'm saying debate, but it's more so just going to be conversation. I guess it's a debate. I don't really know how, I have an idea of how it's going to go, and I'm sure you do too. So maybe I can play a bit of devil advocate, play some of his arguments out to him and see what you would respond with. How's that sound?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. All right, first question. As vegans, we should be calling non-vegans out as being animal abusers and murderers.
Das Video ist auch noch geschnitten, das geht trotzdem 2 Stunden, heiliger.
What do you think? As vegans, we should be calling non-vegans out as being animal abusers and murderers. What do you think?
Yeah, that's what they are. A lot of
Yeah.
people who are non-vegans have a problem with that, but
Das ist ja einfach nur ein Faktum, wenn jemand sagt, nein, das stimmt nicht, sowas kann man nicht Mörder nennen, so jemanden kann man nicht Mörder nennen, NTT on his ass laufen lassen und sehen, wie er auseinanderfällt.
the goal for activism is to, convince people that's what they're actually doing. I don't see a world where if we were doing this to cats and dogs, anybody would disagree with,
Cats and Dogs, ja. Gefängnisstrafe in den USA, 17 Jahre Haft für Mord an einem Hund.
being called an animal abuser. So, if it's not okay to do what we're doing to cats and dogs, then probably not okay to do it to chickens and pigs.
Spot
Ja, dafür muss man Logik verstehen, das ist der ganze Punkt.
on. It's logical, isn't it? What about murderer
Und das lernt nun mal niemand.
specifically?
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
If you're killing an animal for food, it's murder.
Yeah. Why is it murder? Like, people like to say that that's only a legal definition that applies to
Hoffentlich antwortet er mit NTT.
humans. Why would you apply it to non-humans?
Well, the idea behind veganism is to give human rights to animals. So if they're going to disagree with giving human rights to animals, then I'd ask them to name the trait. I don't see any substantive difference between humans and animals where I would deny human rights to animals.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we can get onto that. I do have a question there about non-human animal rights. Moving on to another piece of terminology that's often used by vegans. I guess I can frame it more as a question. Are non-vegans responsible for the largest
Hat er, wenn er aber jetzt den nur wirklich Fragen stellen will, ich frage mich, wie viele Fragen hat er da aufgeschrieben? 317 oder was?
Holocaust in history?
Yes.
Wait, what?
Are non-vegans responsible for the largest Holocaust in history?
Yes. So what's
In Israel?
the figure?
Holocaust in history.
In this industry, Alter, ey. Ich gucke so viele hier Israel, Palästina und so ein Zeug-Videos. Ach, in history. Oh mein Gott. In history. Vielen Dank, Leute.
Are non-vegans
Ja, ich würde auch zu gern mit Kopfhörern gucken, aber das geht nicht.
response often used by vegans? I guess I can frame it more as a question. Are non-vegans responsible for the largest Holocaust in history?
Yes. So what's the figure? Roughly 30-40 billion land animals per year, and if you include sea life, it would be in the trillions of animals killed per year. I don't
Ja, also eigentlich habe ich Zahlen von 70, 80 Milliarden und 2,7 Billionen Wassertiere. 70, 80 Milliarden Landtiere.
know of any. I don't think there's been enough people that have existed to equate to that number of deaths.
Yeah. No, I agree. And what about people that say that Holocaust is using that word is insensitive to Jewish people?
Well, the term actually originated from the word holocausta, which is Greek for fully burnt animal sacrifice. So the term originally referred to animals. Then I think in the 1800s it ended up getting used to describe human tragedies, and then eventually it got picked up, to refer to the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust. But if you look at Jewish rights activists at the time, they actually used a number of animal analogies to describe the Holocaust. They talked about it being, like bringing lambs to the slaughter. People were literally fed onto cattle cars. And there's a lot of Jewish animal rights activists that exist today that actually survived through the Holocaust, and they call it a Holocaust.
Absolutely. The word literally derives from the mass murder of animals, non-human animals. Well, not even mass murder, but that's kind of what we apply the word Holocaust for, really. You can also say that, this seems so straightforward, but why did the Jewish Holocaust have the word Holocaust?
Alter, was steht bei dem auf dem Ärmel auch noch Meat is Murder? Da, what? Was ist das für ein krasses Oberteil, ey, Heiliger? Was steht da alles drauf? Was steht denn da auf dem Rücken noch? Auf beiden Seiten Meat is Murder?
Word was used for a reason.
Da steht Dairy is Murder, Alter.
It's a word that has a definition and applies to a certain situation. How could it only apply to one thing? They didn't create the word for the Jewish Holocaust. I think it's quite straightforward, actually.
Yeah.
I want to ask you this, and we've actually spoken about this before, and it would have been a couple of years ago. And my position, I remember what I said to you, and we can get into it, but my position has definitely changed. But I want to hear your thoughts on this. So hypothetically, if you could press a button right now and you could make it illegal to exploit every single animal worldwide, would you press that button?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Can you explain that position?
Gibt's da irgendwas, also es wird da irgendwas zu überlegen geben?
Yeah, so again, I don't see any meaningful difference between humans and animals where I would deny human rights to animals. So if I could press a button to grant them the same rights as people, I would.
Yeah. Specifically, are you talking sentient animals or just every single animal?
Yeah, sentient. They would have to be sentient.
Yeah. I want to get into what the consequences would be for non-vegans that do exploit animals. But what do you think the initial consequences would be of actually just pressing that button socially? What do you think would happen?
Well, a lot of people would have to change their diet pretty damn quick, or else they'd end up in jail.
Sure.
Yeah.
Understanding that the legal
Oder dass sie dann sterben, natürlich.
system is only enforced by humans, mostly non-vegans, do you think there would be chaos?
I don't think there would be chaos. There's the law, and then there's the law. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with this, especially if you live in Canada with like drug laws and drug offenses. There's a lot of drugs, like marijuana for a while was technically legal, but for like the last decade until they legalized it, there weren't really any major marijuana prosecutions. You could literally smoke openly on the street. Same thing right now with magic mushrooms. That's probably going to be the next big drug to get legalized in Canada. Police just don't care. So if you have a society and police system that just doesn't care about prosecuting certain crimes, they're not going to be prosecuted even though it's technically on the books. So, I mean, if you were to press a button and, this were to get written into law without any societal change, you probably wouldn't see any criminal convictions.
Yeah, and I guess then the question is, the legal system really, would you say that the legal system reflects what society values and deems should be enforced and not enforced? I guess to put it simply, do you think the legal system has to reflect what the majority of society wants?
Yeah, pretty much. Especially what the police want. If the police have certain interests, then, again, you're not going to convince police to make arrests when they could not, be fucked otherwise.
Sure.
So, especially when it comes to the police, if you have a bunch of asshole macho dudes who like eating, barbecue and shit, They're probably not going to really go out of their way to prosecute meat eating. So it's going to require societal change, and especially people who get, into law enforcement, them specifically having an interest in prosecuting.
Yeah. So whilst you could
Ja, political change wird sein.
press the button, you're also being realistic and saying that it might not be as effective if we can't convince people first.
Yeah, again, there needs to be some sort of societal change. And now, that being said, I'd still
Ja, und der kommt durch Politik, oder?
press the button. I don't think it would be completely...
Obligation.
I don't think it would be a waste. The first step into making sure that animals are protected is to grant them rights. So rights have to be granted. That's the only way they're going to eventually get the same protections as human beings.
Ja, ich sag immer noch, es wird darum gehen, die Haustierschutzrechte, ich glaube, die heißen Tierschutzrechte oder Tierschutzrechte 1, auf Nutztiere auszuweiten. Das wird der Gamechanger sein. Hallo. Da ist er, hallo.
But yeah, realistically, if you were to just magically sign something into law, wouldn't necessarily mean it's going to be enforced.
Yeah. I guess then the question is like, yeah, you can press it. I think we have an obligation to press it. You would be stupid not to press it as a vegan. Like, why would you not? Yes, it might not be the most effective thing straight away.
Ja, und der hat vorher gesagt, er hat seine Position geändert. Also der hatte die Position am Anfang nicht. Also der hat diesen Earthling Ad-Take gemacht, der übelste Absturz ist, als Veganer sowas zu bringen. Earthling Ad hat ja gesagt, nein, der würde den nicht drücken.
Might not work straight away. It may not work, or it might work, but you'd be, I think
It doesn't matter, ob es funktioniert oder nicht.
it would be wrong not to press it.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think you asked me that a couple of years ago, and I think initially I was just thinking like it wouldn't work, so why press? No. Yeah, I did say, well, why press it if it's just not going to work? It's only going to create things. It might make things worse. And look, I guess that is another question to ask you. Do you think that if you tried to make it illegal and it was to be enforced, would that create a whole underground system where animals are murdered, probably in even worse conditions? What do you think about that?
Well, if you look at the scale of things, again, roughly 30, 40 billion land animals, somewhere in that neighborhood, if things have to go underground, you're not going to have, a massive,
Ja, das ist der ganze Punkt. Auf jeden Fall, es wird ein Schwarzmarkt entstehen für Tierprodukte, aber er wird ja viel kleiner sein. Du kannst, wie willst du diese ganzen Tiere verstecken? Du willst 80 Milliarden Landtiere verstecken? How?
chicken
Was willst du machen? Die Erde aushöhlen?
farm in somebody's like apartment. It's not like the same as growing weed, right? Like you can make a lot of weed in a basement apartment or something, but you can't really grow a lot of chickens in an apartment complex.
Und Kühe.
So even if in theory there would certainly be an underground industry of animal farming, you wouldn't get into the billions, like we are now.
Sure. Yeah, I understand that. So then again, we touched on this earlier, but should non-humans be granted the same rights as humans?
Should non-humans be granted the same rights as humans? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mean animals, right? Like non-human animals?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Again, if you disagree, I'd like somebody to name the trait. I've yet to ask somebody the name the trait question and get a reasonable response.
Ja, der hat auch noch nie eine Antwort auf NTT gehört, also ein Kontern, die Fieder. No shit, ich auch nicht.
Usually people will mention things like intelligence or the trait being human, and that leads to reductios like, okay, would you kill black people if they happen to not be human? Would you kill mentally disabled people? And usually they'll either bite the bullet and look like a moron, or they'll, second guess themselves.
Yeah. What about people that say, well, they shouldn't have the exact same rights? Why should they have the right to vote?
So the rights would be granted on the basis of them being trait equalized. So in theory, like you would.
Siehst du, man kann so raushören von dem, was er sagt, seine veganen Definition, ne? Und das hier ist seine vegane Definition, und zwar meine Definition. Exakt das.
It's a little complicated. We do give mentally disabled people the right to vote because it's a touchy political issue, but in theory, if it wasn't sort of a touchy issue, yeah, people who are severely mentally disabled shouldn't have the right to vote because they're not mentally competent to. So same with animals. Sure. Like, I mean, we don't give children the right to vote if you're like 10 years old. So, you know, similar kind of thing there. You would only grant rights on the basis of, you know, these beings being trait equalized. So if they roughly have the same intelligence as, like, say, a three-year-old child, they'd get, you know, roughly the same rights.
Also natürlich, wenn ein Tier voten könnte, wenn es Sinn ergeben würde, wenn es dieselben Traits hat, so dass er berechtigt ist zu voten, dürfte natürlich auch ein Tier voten. Von daher, deswegen heißt es Trait Equalized, ne, wie man in meiner Definition auch sehen kann. Veganismus ist eine logische Ausweitung elementarer Menschenrechte auf eigenschaftsangeglichene Lebewesen.
This is a 3-year-old child.
Sure. So does that mean that we should be more
Ein Schwein kann nicht voten, deswegen hat es auch kein Votingrecht.
Specific in granting rights to non-human animals and say they should have these set of rights, or should it just have every right that we have? Do you have to be more specific, or it doesn't matter?
I don't think it matters because I don't see chickens lining up to vote. So I don't see that causing any kind of like mass chaos.
What would you say are the most important rights that non-human animals should be having?
Well, certainly the
Recht auf körperliche Unversehrtheit.
right to life. So they shouldn't be, you shouldn't be allowed to kill them for food. They should have protection under the law to at least, you know, have their rights, the right to life protected, and protection from abuse. That's a big one.
Can you define abuse?
Yeah, so something that causes undue harm, distress, or exploitation.
Would you say
Das ist so lustig. Ich habe ja euch gerade diese Kopfhörer gezeigt, ne, und ich habe sogar diese Kopfhörer. Die liegen hinter mir. Da, ihr könnt ein Bild sehen. Da drin liegen die. Ich könnte beide Kopfhörer anziehen, die beiden haben. Das ist so lustig. Lustiger Zufall.
that there's ever a context in where it would be in your right, even when non-human animals have the right to life, to kill them?
Yeah, so in a self-defense scenario, if a...
Ja, gute Fragen, aber ja klar, für Neulinge ist das super interessant, aber gute Fragen, ja. Also die nicht nur Standardfragen, sondern so interessante Fragen, ne? Darf man Tiere töten? Sollten Tiere Votingrecht haben und sowas? Sollte man den Button pressen? Pipapo. Ja, gute Fragen. Diese so ein bisschen auch Grenzwertfragen.
Like, if you're gonna get beaten by an inch of your life by a deer and it's about to kill you, I don't see a problem with using lethal force to, you know, protect your life.
We can get into this a little bit
Genau, das ist genau das Gleiche, ne? Würdest du ja auch bei Menschen genauso machen.
more later when we talk about wild animal suffering, but you just specifically said
Wild Animal Suffering, let's go, das wird was.
self-defense in that moment. Like if an animal is coming for you, what about an animal that you can guarantee is likely to kill a human at some point?
So yeah,
Like a lion.
well, lion, a bear.
Not even a human, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that'd be fine too. If you're talking about
Yep.
beings that need to kill to survive and don't have the sort of mental capacity to, you know, have sort of moral authority, then it's okay to kill them to prevent, you know, more rights violations.
All right, we won't go too deep into that just yet. I will say that I watched the your full conversation with Avi on that one, and I found it really interesting. So we'll get a little bit deeper into that soon. Okay, moving on from non-human rights. Are non-human animals people too?
Yeah, I'd say so. Especially like more intelligent animals, you could certainly give them personhood.
Can you define personhood? Because many non-vegans you speak to, and vegans actually, would say, well, they're not people, only humans are people.
Yeah, so if we were to come across like an intelligent alien race, like Vulcans from Star Trek, we would consider them people. I think personhood is generally accepted or acknowledged or granted if, the species is intelligent, they can communicate on some level, they're social. We usually give, that sort of term of personhood to beings like that. And
Also ich würde sagen, Person ist die eine Persönlichkeit hat. Tiere haben ja eine Persönlichkeit. Wenn du 3 Katzen zu Hause hast, alle 3 werden verschieden sein. Das kann jeder Haustierbesitzer erzählen.
I think like a lot of animals like dogs, cats.
Und du kannst 2 Katzen derselben Rasse haben oder 2 Hunde derselben Rasse, die werden unterschiedlich sein.
Cows, chickens, they
Also sprich andere Charaktere.
have enough intelligence, they're social enough where you would just kind of intuitively give them personhood.
Yeah. I've heard it put more simply that a person is somebody that you consider part of the moral community. What do you think about that?
That would make sense, but I mean, like a psychopath is still a person. There are psychopaths who literally just spend their time looking for victims and murder. They're still a person. They're a bad person, but still a person.
Yeah. So a person to you is somebody that has a certain level of intelligence, sociable, can be a part of a society, have kinship, etc., etc. What about just something as simple as saying someone that has a personality? Do you think that's not enough?
I think that makes sense too.
Yeah. So the word person actually comes from the word persona. And I think, I forget which culture that came from. It might have been Greek, where I think that represents persona, which is the mask you put on. So it's actually like the ego.
Genau, was gerade im Chat geschrieben wurde. Lustig.
Of a human, not a human, but any individual that has what you would consider an ego, a personality, an outer character. And I think that is...
Genau, das meine ich. So würde ich eine Person bezeichnen.
Very obvious in most non-human animals that you ever come across. They are sentient creatures, but not only that, they have personality.
Aber ich würde auch niemanden angreifen dafür oder sowas, wenn der das nicht so sieht. Da sehe ich kein Problem. Aber zu sagen, dass jemand kein Mörder ist zum Beispiel und halt die Schuld von sich weist, da kann man easy peasy NTT laufen lassen.
Have preferences, they have families, etc., etc. Yeah, I think it's fairly obvious. But do you think it's important that we make it clear that non-human animals are people when in dialogue with non-vegans?
Yeah, I mean, if something doesn't have personhood, it's much harder to empathize. So, I don't know if you could necessarily give personhood to a creature like an ant. They're very low intelligence, low sentience. They don't. As far as I understand, their personalities aren't very distinct from one another, if they even have a personality technically. But
I know what you're saying there, and I think it's harder to grant somebody. I'm saying somebody, even in the case of ants, personhood, when it's hard to really get down on their level literally and actually see whether how can you even measure that? Is there even a way of measuring whether the level of sentience and personhood of somebody?
Also Ameisen können sogar Mirror-Test bestehen. Ich weiß nicht, ob die so dumm sind.
I don't know if there's any kind of established scientific method of establishing something like sentience. Like, sentience is just the ability to have a subjective experience. Now, I think the amount of subjective experiences that an ant can have is certainly less than the amount of subjective experiences a human can have. So you can look at things that way. But like again, in order to get somebody to empathize with something, I think it's important to establish some level of personhood.
Sure.
It's hard for me to feel bad for an ant. Pretty easy for me to feel bad for like a dog.
Yeah. I was going to say, because like I'm sitting out the back of my house quite often and I see ants down on the floor and I just can't help but watch them. And it's hard not to have empathy for them when you actually see them going past one another, you see them go up to one another, you see them having teamwork, carrying things from one place to another. You see this level of communication, what actually seems quite complex, and I'm sure many scientists would probably say that ants do have complex communication. They have kinship with one another. There is a definite level of intelligence, obviously. I'm not saying they're the highest intelligence, but they have a decent level of intelligence compared to a flower. Do you think that sometimes our level of understanding of another being might hinder whether our decision making and whether we should consider their right to life, their level of sentience?
Well, I'm sure we tend to look at things through a human lens. So we may anthropomorphize things, or we might think something's below us because it's less anthropomorphic.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's possible that ants do deserve more sympathy than they get from people. But again, like in the interest of like something like activism, I think establishing personhood, at least for the animals that are getting, holocausted, pretty important for activism.
Sure. Do you think it's okay if someone just purposely goes and steps on an ant? Would you have an issue with that?
I don't know. Ants are carnivorous, right? So
Depends whether they're the top.
Das wäre auch meine erste Frage. Ich glaube, die sind Karnivore.
They might be the top, but we can get into that, I guess, but yeah, go on.
yeah, so if they're carnivorous and they're killing other animals, then obviously it would reduce rights violations if you killed those ants.
It's interesting because ants would probably go out of their way to kill animals that are larger than them and even higher up the food chain, I guess you could say. I don't know where ants specifically sit in that, because I don't even know what they eat. They eat insects primarily, and
Ja, die essen auf jeden Fall Tiere, die höher in der Food Chain sind.
it's quite horrifying actually watching ants. Yeah, they do. It's quite horrifying watching ants attack. Tash and I were walking at the park and we saw this praying mantis really struggling. Like you could tell this praying mantis, like the heart was pumping or something was pumping. They were definitely scared and suffering, and just had thousands of ants climbing up on top of the praying mantis. The praying mantis was trying to get away, so we actually helped the praying mantis.
Was für ein Tier ist das? Weiß das jemand auf Deutsch?
But man, it's actually, when you take the time to analyze and see what's going on in the natural world and what's even happening to small insects like a praying mantis, it's easy to empathize and be like, holy shit, this isn't right.
Yeah, especially in the insect world, things are pretty goddamn horrific.
Gottes Anbeterin schlägt das Herz.
I don't like creepy crawlies, and when I see like ants or just a ton of spiders or cockroaches or something swarming another like bug and just chewing it to pieces, it's pretty nasty.
Yeah, but you wouldn't be okay with killing a spider, for example, because they're not an apex predator, would you?
Well, no, I'm fine with killing spiders. Like, again, they kill flies and other insects, and in pretty horrific ways too. They like wrap them up and like let them die slowly and shit.
But they're not the apex because birds eat them, larger animals will eat them. So would you say that that's not right? Larger animals
and shit.
But they're not the apex because birds eat them, larger animals will eat them. So would you say that that's not right?
I'd be fine with birds eating spiders. Again, I would imagine that would reduce rights violations because spiders have to, again, kill many other insects over their lifetime to survive.
So you would be okay with killing birds then because they are at the top of the chain. No one's going to be eating the birds or killing the birds.
Yeah, it depends on the species. Again, if it's a carnivorous, bird like, I don't know, an eagle, probably.
Okay. Pretty much, if I'm talking here in Australia, it's the majority of birds that would be considered carnivorous. There are some that would just rely on nuts and seeds, but like cockatoos, galahs, but pretty much, and I see a lot of birds here quite often. There's heaps in Australia. Most of them
Alter, diese ganzen Tiernamen, ne, kenne ich gar nicht.
would be an apex carnivorous animal. So in that case, you would be okay with killing certain animals, like, for example, I can think of like a willy wagtail, a honey eater, I think. What do you think about that?
Yeah, like, I mean, if we're gonna get into the whole killing predators thing, assuming it wouldn't cause like some sort of catastrophic ecological destruction, where like every animal in the ecosystem dies, then yeah, I'd be in favor of it.
All right, let's dig deeper after one more question. And I don't want to spend, I know we could spend probably an hour just on the wild animal suffering question, but we'll get a little bit deeper into that. Now, I heard you referring to, when we were talking about certain animals having personhood, you were referring to them as something or it.
Mücken auf jeden Fall klatschen, ja.
And that's the next question. So, should we be referring to non-human animals and humans as it instead of, say, and something? So it and something rather than he, she, or them.
Yeah, so it kind of depends on the context. There are situations where you'd refer to someone, like, you know, a person you don't know as it. Like, if you see somebody in the distance, oh, I think it's some dude or something. I think that's a black guy. Usually, like, I've heard a lot of people say, like, if they're asking about a baby's name, what's its name? Usually when, you know, again, someone isn't part of like a social circle yet, they're not quite lucid or intelligent enough, usually you say, you know, it. So there are certain circumstances where, again, I could see somebody referring to an animal as it, but if you know its name, if you know its like personality, it doesn't really make sense to refer to the animal as it anymore.
It's interesting. I mean, so in the case of when you were saying, like, there's a baby and you say, what's it, you know, what's its name or whatever, you're literally then referring to them as it. Like, you can see them in front of you. You might be able to tell their gender, but say someone might say, oh, that's it, you know. Just because someone might say that, or they've been conditioned to refer to babies, is that really a good argument to be calling babies it, just because someone's been brought up to call them it?
I don't see what the ethical issue is, like, especially if you don't know someone's gender. It's a gender neutral term, so it just makes kind of practical sense to say it rather than say, what's his name?
Also, stimmt, man sagt ja auch ist es, ne? Du weißt ja das Geschlecht nicht, dann sagst du ist es fröhlich oder ist es hungrig oder so. Wenn du weißt, dass das ein Mädchen ist, sagst du ja ist. Ja, sagst du auch eigentlich es, ne?
Oh, it's a she. Oh, what's her name? Just, you know, just makes conversation.
Ja, bei Namen, es kommt drauf an, was du fragst, ne? Was ist ihr Name? Ja. Ja, im Deutschen ist das anders.
It's a little annoying, so.
Yeah. I would personally say, and I think I've always done this, I would just say, oh, what's their name? Just what's their name? But I think the importance of this then, to come back a little bit, would be, I think when we're referring to someone as an it correlates with an object, something, like something, meaning objectification. They're not a someone, they're not a sentient individual. Would you agree that that's a case to be made?
Depends on the context. So, there certainly are contexts where that would be the case. I remember there was a news story about a transgender person trying to get their license updated at the DMV, and the person at the DMV counter referred to them as it. That is definitely, you know, one of those cases. But yeah, if you're just asking, like, what's its name, and you don't know, like, the gender or anything, and you're not familiar with the person, then I don't see that as a problem.
Okay, well, in that case, let's say the trans person walks up to the counter, the server doesn't know their name, doesn't know their personality, knows nothing about them. They might even be wearing a mask, so you can't actually tell who they are, and they say, and then they just write down it, because that's all they got. Like, what do you think in that case it would still be fair to just refer to them as what's their name, et cetera, et cetera? Do you think that saying them or their is better than saying it in most contexts?
Probably. Like, again, in the human example too, you're so socialized with other people. As long as you can establish something's a humanoid, it's kind of weird calling somebody it.
Why would it be wrong to say it in some circumstances? What is the actual issue that you would take when it is used in a context you don't think is right?
Yeah, it's like it's taking away somebody's personhood, basically. Sure. Yeah.
So in that case, even if I'm referring to a non-human animal, like we agreed earlier, they should be granted personhood. But let's say that you don't think that they are worth, or they're still not worthy of being called a him, she, or them, and you would refer to them as it. Don't you think that's contradictory?
Again, not necessarily. Like, babies are probably the most, you know, protected group. Oh my God, a baby, save the baby. People run into a burning building to save a stupid baby. But like, like again, we still will say, you know, it's not culturally an appropriate task. Like, what's its name? So I don't know. It
Sure,
just
but again-
seems like what I take issue with is probably when things are more deliberate, when you're deliberately trying to take away someone's personhood by calling a trans person it. Like that's a obvious example of trying to depersonhood
Sure.
somebody.
Yeah, but then when it came to the case of the baby, would you say that because that's how we've been culturally brought up to think, do you think culture is a good justification to, is that where you derive your morals or decision making like that?
Like, again, I just don't see what the problem is with referring to a baby as it. I haven't seen any evidence that referring to baby, like asking what's its name, that's resulted in babies, I don't know, being thrown in blenders or anything. Like, again, babies are probably the most, like, protected class of person on the planet. If you kill a baby,
Sure.
you're an absolute monster.
Human babies.
But yeah, but again, we still call them it. So I don't see a big correlation between using those sorts of phrases and, you know, violating the rights of individuals. I think this is just kind of how language sort of naturally works, where, again, if you don't know somebody's gender, you're not familiar with the person, they're not kind of in your social circle yet, they're not lucid, then you're more likely to call them it.
Yeah, I think to put it simply though, like, I think it has, well, in terms of whether it's important or not, I would say that it has reverberating effects within society. So whilst it's not going to be harmful to the baby to refer to them as it, I just think that that's creating a cultural norm where it's then easy to refer to non-human people as it. And then it by definition is referring to, say, an object, someone that is not a someone. It's a something, right? An inanimate object. So I just think by definition, it doesn't make sense to call any sentient being an object because they're not an object.
Yeah, I would say it just entirely depends on the context. I think when you say it in certain circumstances, yeah, it is, you know, referring to somebody as an object. In other circumstances, I don't think that's the implication. It just entirely depends on context.
Sure. All right. I think we can leave it there. Maybe we can agree to differ on that one. I think we agree on a big proportion of that, but it's more so coming down to whether you think that they are lucid enough to be aware that they are someone. Even though that we know that they're someone, they might not know it themselves. But so, like, I mean, an example like that, like, would be a mentally handicapped person, right? They might not be aware that they're someone, but we definitely know they are.
Like, again, that's an aspect of it. Just being part of somebody's social circle, being aware of their gender, their personality, that all factors in, and whether or not you're gonna, you know, refer to somebody as it, and depending on other contexts too.
Okay. Let's now move on. We've been briefly touching on this throughout the conversation, but are vegans obligated to find ways to prevent animal suffering, wild animal suffering, sorry?
So I wouldn't say we're obligated to prevent any suffering. I think the only obligation you have is to not violate the rights of others. You may have an interest in reducing suffering, but I wouldn't say you're obligated.
Yeah. Okay. So but you still would take issue personally with wild animal suffering that is occurring. And I know that you think we should be doing something about it, or should maybe isn't the right word for you then. You wouldn't say that we should be trying to prevent wild animal suffering, or it's just if it's of your interest?
So I have an interest in preventing wild animal suffering. Just due to me having an interest, I think we should eventually invest in research and maybe technology to engineer ecosystems to prevent wild animal suffering.
Sure. So what do you think until then we should be actively going out there and killing animals that would be at the top of a food chain, an apex predator? Is it odd? What is it? Odd, what's the word? Odd and even?
Odd order predators.
Odd order predators, yes. So ones that aren't going to be getting killed by other animals.
So I think it also refers to the amount of animals they kill, like something like that, just the amount of animals they kill over their lifespan. But yeah, like the idea behind it is to prevent more rights violations. So if you know that, like if you have an interest in granting animals rights, so you want to make sure a deer doesn't get murdered, well, other animals may murder that deer. And if you know that there's a specific type of animal, like, I don't know, wolf, that will murder many deer over its lifetime, you're going to be preventing more rights violations by murdering that wolf. It might be like, say, 100, murders by murdering that wolf. So that's the idea behind it. I like the only argument I've heard against doing that would be some sort of ecological devastation. So, like, say if there weren't any wolves, then deer population.
Genau, die Konsequenzen können das natürlich kippen, die Position, aber die Frage ist, wie du es im Vakuum siehst. Das ist der ganze Punkt. Weil die Menschen sehen das nicht mehr im Vakuum. Deswegen kann man die da easy peasy widerlegen mit Logik.
Wouldn't be controlled, then they'd overbreed and then eat everything, then they'd all starve out. Something like that. But
Wenn einer sagt, ja, ein Löwe darf ein Zebra fressen, ich würde den Löwen nicht erschießen im Vakuum, da fragst du einfach, darf der Löwe ein Menschenbaby fressen? Dann sagt er, nein, natürlich nicht, ich würde den Löwen erschießen. Ich würde den Löwen erschießen. Well, name the trade.
assuming there's not going to be that kind of
Und die Person wird den Trade natürlich nicht nennen können.
ecological devastation, I haven't heard a good argument against calling carnivorous animals.
And
Also ich meine, die wird Trades nennen können, aber die wird halt von einem Widerspruch in den anderen stolpern.
just for pretty much anyone watching, vegans, non-vegans, they're probably going, what the fuck are you talking about right now? Like, how could you ever justify, especially as a vegan, going out and killing other animals? But I think a good way to put this, and maybe you can explain this further. I mean, I don't have a definite position on it, but after watching your video with Avi, and people can, maybe I can link that right now and people can go take a look at it, I would say it's a surprisingly strong case, even just kind of, not pragmatically yet, maybe, I don't know, we can get into the pragmatics of it, but just from a thought experiment, it does make a philosophical perspective. It makes a lot of sense. And I think a really good way to
Ja, um Logik geht's hier.
put it is, imagine if there was a predator species for humans, right? Like you could say like an alien.
Tauscht das Opfer der Tiere. Wenn jemand sagt, nein, Tiere dürfen andere Tiere fressen, dann tauscht das Opfer, was gefressen wird, mit einem Menschen aus. Und dann stellst du die Frage nochmal. Und dann guckst du mal, wie es für dich ausgeht.
Alien predator, but just imagine another animal that is the apex above humans and they're going to be going around society and killing humans. Most humans would be okay with killing that animal in order to protect humans, right? So why would we not be okay with killing other apex predators to other animals that aren't humans in order to protect them? It's a contradiction. Can you maybe explain that a bit further and how that's helped rationalize this idea to you?
Yeah, so I don't know if people have seen the movie Aliens or Predator, or there's vampire movies. You could name any kind of like monster.
Falls sich jemand fragt, warum ich in Debatten mit Vampiren ankomme, und deswegen habe ich von Vegan Gains.
Or being that would kill and eat people. So let's say vampires were real and they were going around killing and eating people so that they can live. We'd obviously hunt vampires to extinction so that they don't, kill people. Now, if we're comfortable with killing off vampires, why would we not be comfortable with killing off wolves to protect deer? Wolves are basically the vampires for deer. So again, you could use this argument, but what about the ecosystem? Well, okay, would you be okay with letting human beings get killed and eaten by vampires to protect the ecosystem?
Ja, das ist der geilste Konter gegen dieses Konsequenzen-Argument.
Human beings are the most ecologically devastating species on the planet too, by the way.
Das ist der beste Konter Nummer 2. Sagt jemand, er schert sich um die Umwelt. Weil da müsste man die Menschen umbringen, alle. Weil die sind die schlimmsten für die Umwelt.
Okay, so that's probably, that's probably the best argument, in favor of letting vampires kill and eat people. But I don't think most people would be comfortable with that. They'd say something.
Also wir würden das nicht mal akzeptieren, wenn wir wüssten, dass das Ökosystem kollabiert. Also die Vampire. Wir würden die Vampire trotzdem umbringen, obwohl dann das Ökosystem kollabiert. Weil die Vampire mit den Menschen im Natural Predator-Prey Cycle sind. Wir würden sie trotzdem alle umbringen.
Like, oh, but we could make it so humans don't breed as much, or we can make regulations to protect the environment, stuff like that. It's the same, it's the same argument being made to kill off wolves. Like, if it would become ecologically devastating, the idea is we'd have some sort of technology to prevent deer from overpopulating, eating too much, stuff like that. We could maybe.
Ja, ich würde Deer einfach mal laufen lassen und gucken, was für Probleme das verursacht. Natürlich kann man da auch eingreifen, aber ich glaube einfach immer noch nicht daran. Ich denke immer noch, die Natur wird regeln.
Control how often they breed.
Das Futterangebot ist nicht unendlich.
So, that's the basic idea.
Why not create I think when you said vampire, then it actually kind of triggered something, because vampires are essentially like humanoid beings, right? And obviously this is hypothetical, but why not create a legal system like we do today in our society to prevent us having to go out and kill people in self-defense or the prevention of a future killing? Why not have all these other measures in place that minimize our need to go and kill other beings?
What do you mean by that?
So in the case of a predator against humans, should we come up, I say legal system, but really, should we come up with ways to, let's say, prevent them killing humans without actually having to be violent ourselves? Should we find ways to confine them or what's the word?
Ja, wir haben doch schon Gesetze, was?
tranquilize them, etc., contracept them, you know,
Meint die Tiere oder was?
those types of things. Would that be better?
I mean, I've done that with my cats, basically. If you let cats outside, they'll kill and eat birds and just anything they can get a hold of. But I keep them inside and I feed them vegan cat food. So
we can get onto that.
ideally that
Ach, dazu wollte ich auch noch kommen, ja. Das ist auch noch so ein Punkt. Also die übelst guten Fragen, holy shit. Diese ganzen Fragen, wo Veganer hops gehen, werden hier gestellt, so gut. Auch dieses, Alter, es gibt so viele Veganer, die erzählen, dass man seine Haustiere nicht vegan ernähren sollte. Holy shit, wenn du die mal presst alle, ne? Wie die alle auseinanderfliegen, das ist so gut. Aber wie man den Fehler selbst nicht erkennt. Ne? Du lässt Tiere ins Leben züchten, abschlachten, um dein Tier zu füttern. Ne? Merkt jemand den Fehler?
would be done, but considering the amount of wild animals in existence, probably impractical to house. I don't know how many lions, I don't know how many tigers, I don't know how many wolves, and like
there's so
billion
many
other
carnivorous
carnivorous
animals.
species. Yeah.
Yeah. It would be really. I mean, and this is what I want to ask you. Like, pragmatically, do you even think that this is the right thing to be doing? Like, whilst in a philosophical level, it's hard to make an argument to just let wild animals, especially apex predators, go around murdering animals because we wouldn't want the same for ourselves. But is it even practical to go and do something about it right now?
Yeah, we
Ganz genau, das ist das Problem mit Obligationen. Ganz genau das.
have caused many species extinctions, so yes, it is quite practical to right now go out and hunt a species to extinction. We could absolutely do it. We've almost done it with lions. I think there have been some type of rhino was recently hunted to extinction. So it's practical. We could do it. I don't know if it's necessarily a good idea right now with the lack of research and what that would result in.
And I know this was you in your conversation with Avi, but there's a part in you that's screaming, saying that this is wrong. This is not right to be going.
Ja, es ist intuitiv, hört es sich falsch an. Aber halt, sobald man das gecheckt hat, sobald man Logik anwendet, dann versteht man das ja.
And killing somebody when you should really be taking the time to find out other ways to prevent this.
Yeah, so I think what really weirded me out in that conversation is just I've never thought about that before. Like when you kind of think about wild animals, you just think about, well, that's their society and we should be respecting their freedoms and all this, but
Respecting their freedoms, ja, würdest du das auch bei einem Mörder sagen?
again, if you're going to grant animals rights, you have to grant them rights that protect them from people and other animals. Otherwise, you're not really granting them rights.
Right.
I guess then another.
Was für eine Rolle spielt es, ob die Kuh vom Menschen ermordet wird oder von einem Laien? So eine Rolle spielt das. Du musst ihm Rechte granten, deswegen musst du beides verhindern.
The question would be, and this is often brought up in conversations between vegans and non-vegans, and we say that, well, you can't appeal to nature and you can't appeal to lions, though, because they don't have access to vegan options, but you do. Do you still think that's a fair
Ja, das hat er gerade erklärt mit den Vampiren. Vampiren sind auch angewiesen.
thing to be saying, or should we change that argument?
I don't think it's a problematic argument in any way. So if somebody says, well, what about lions? They eat meat. You could make that same response and it not contradict with your opinion that we should be killing carnivorous animals. Because,
Right.
you're not a lion. You have choices. So what do you, it's just not relatable to your position. Usually when people bring that up to me, what about lions? I just say, well, lions shouldn't be killing innocent animals either. That's usually what I
Doesn't make
say.
it moral.
Ja, so weit gehe ich gar nicht. Ich mache das viel softer. Also ich komme da nicht mit Wild Animal Suffering. Also
It doesn't make it moral that animals are doing it out of necessity.
And
ich sag einfach, wenn jemand, also ich komme mit der Appeal to Lions Fallacy oder Appeal to Animals Fallacy, wenn du es zusammenfassen willst. Und das war's. Dann frage ich, ja, Löwen vergewaltigen also Löwen vergewaltigen Tiere, dürfen wir Tiere vergewaltigen? Dann sollte es offensichtlich sein.
usually I don't have to go down a whole rabbit hole of, killing carnivorous animals. People just say, yeah, I guess you're right. Like, just because a lion does it doesn't mean it's okay for us to do it. So in terms of vegan activism, I haven't found it create these problems where every single time somebody brings up lions, though, I have to spend like 30 minutes arguing about whether or not we should kill carnivorous animals. So I wouldn't be worried about that.
No, you don't normally have to. It's actually quite simple and it's really just.
Ja, aber das mit dem Löwen kommt wirklich sau oft. Lächerlich oft.
Lions aren't morally thinking creatures. They don't have a choice often, but
Ja, Vampire auch nicht.
not that that makes it moral to do it, but it's just that you do have a choice. You can literally walk to the grocery store and choose the
Ja, ich weiß nicht, ob das das beste Argument ist mit diesem You have a choice.
option that doesn't involve inherent exploitation. It's
Ich finde den Fallacy-Weg sinnvoller.
quite simple, and it's quite laughable that people still make that argument. But again, the
Dasa ist jetzt anwesend. Sehr gut. Wir haben noch ein bisschen.
question then comes up, and I was thinking about this morning, and I know this was brought up in your conversation with Avi. If humans are now going out and actively killing apex predators, which would be really with the goal of mass extinction of those particular animals, are we not then becoming the apex predator and then we should shoot ourselves? What do you think
What the fuck?
about that?
I don't think so. Like, again, it's like we killed
Das sind beides Veganer, ja.
Nazis, and we tried.
Also das hier ist Vegan Gains. Also die berühmteste vegane Person der Welt wahrscheinlich. Und das hier ist der Freund von, also der echte Freund. Also die sind zusammen. Ich weiß nicht, hier ist ein Hochzeitsbild. Vielleicht ist er verheiratet mit Tash Peterson, die beste Aktivistin der Welt.
Tried to rid the world of Nazis, and it's like we killed Nazis, and we tried to rid the world of Nazis. I don't see, like, if you look at it in that way, if you're just trying to prevent rights violations, I don't see it as being hypocritical.
It's a solid point to make, and that's the, and I'm sure there's so many people watching right now.
Ja, gib dir mal Konter. Wird schief gehen.
They're just being like, no, you just can't do it. But really, not that, look,
Ja, stimmt, hast recht. Ich glaube, Tash hat auch keine roten Haare.
whilst, like I said, philosophically, there's no, at this point, right, I still have to think about it, and I'm sure we still have more to discuss on it. But at this point, I can't come back with a strong argument to that, because like you just said, the Nazi argument, that's a solid one right there. We would all say that it's okay to go and do it. But I guess a lot of people, and we just discussed this, would be saying that, well, they weren't doing that out of necessity, but a lion is doing
Echt, Alter, ihr kennt Vegan Gains nicht? What the fuck?
it out of necessity. Did we touch on that really, like the whole point of necessity there, like a lion doing it out of necessity?
Also ihr kennt mich, aber ihr kennt Vegan Gains nicht. Da peitscht mich doch aus, Alter. Was für ein Superstar bin ich denn?
Yeah, well, maybe you could go
So,
better on that.
if Nazis had to kill Jews to eat them so that they could live, would we have a problem killing Nazis? Probably not. I don't think when people bring up necessity that they really care about necessity too
Alter, das hatten wir. Warum bringt er das Argument mit den Vampiren nicht einfach wieder? Die Vampire brauchen Menschenblut.
much when you think about it in that context. They're kind of thinking of things from the perpetrator and not the victim. Because if you're the
Yes, that's
perpetrator, you're obviously going to make the excuse, well, I need to do it. Well, if you're thinking about it from the victim's perspective, they don't really care if you need to do it because they're the victim.
I got a good one. I would say that a pedophile genetically has a desire that they can't stop.
Ja, ich glaube, der meint eher so in einem Vakuum-Szenario, würdest du Nazi erschießen oder nicht? Also die Dichotomie-Frage.
To want to, whatever they want to do to kids, really has a desire that they can't stop to want to, whatever they want to do to kids, really. And just because they are genetically programmed to feel that way, you could say, or maybe nurtured that way. I don't really know the science behind it, but from what I know, genetically, that's just a part of their disposition.
Ja, spielt ja keine Rolle für Rechtsverletzungen.
To want to do whatever they want to children, which we would all disagree with.
Ja, da hat auch das im Kontext vom Zweiten Weltkrieg wahrscheinlich noch. Also, wenn du sagst, nein, nicht erschießen, dann wird er halt Juden umbringen.
Doesn't mean that because it's in their nature to want to be a pedophile that we grant them the right to be a pedophile. No, we would give them consequences to that.
Genau, ja, kann man auch sagen.
But now let's put you, I give you a gun and I say, I want you to go to Africa and just mass kill every lion. Like literally, if I gave you the money and the gun to do it, would you accept that and go and do it if I paid you to do it?
Would I do it personally?
Yeah.
I don't think I'd really have an interest in doing it. I don't really want to kill animals, but, you know, I'm sure some people would want to. Like, I also don't want to clean toilets, but, you know, there's people who clean toilets.
Interesting. But this is not the same as cleaning toilets. We're talking about lives here. Do you not think that that would be a good thing to do? Like if I actually gave you the money and said, like, this is a good amount of money, this is enough for you to go do it, would you go and do it?
If it paid well enough, maybe. But again, just because I wouldn't personally have an interest in doing it,
Komische Frage, also. Du kannst einfach fragen, sollte man das machen? Why muss er das machen?
it doesn't mean it's a moral problem. There's plenty of things that are good to do. That, like, I wouldn't want to raise an adopted child. I kind of hate kids. Doesn't mean it's wrong to, raise an adopted child. So it's also not wrong to clean toilets. It's not wrong to work at a bank. There's plenty of things I wouldn't want to do, but it doesn't mean it's a moral problem.
Yeah, I agree it's a moral problem, but it's one of those things.
Blade hat doch auch einen Ersatzstoff bekommen. Der hat auch kein Mensch ausgesagt, ja. Das ist natürlich die Lösung, ja. Also man meint da schon ein Vakuum.
Things where I'm like, I couldn't do it. I think with every argument we've just discussed in favor of apex predator killing, I wouldn't do it. And I think mostly, I just think without having the science to prove that it's only going to create more issues downstream, we could just be making things worse.
Ja, aber das sind alles Claims, die du belegen musst. Du hast BOP, wenn du solche Aussagen machst. Das ist das ganze Ding.
In terms of creating
Genau deswegen stellt man diese Fragen im Vakuum.
more suffering. I mean, I think we discussed
Weil der BOP wegfällt.
that, but maybe you could touch on that a little bit more. What if it was to create more suffering?
It's possible. It's a possibility. So, like, before we go out and start killing carnivorous animals, I'd want, like, research to be done to see if it, would actually create more suffering.
Exactly. So ideally, you would want other technologies in place that doesn't have to involve violence.
Ja, sicher.
Ideally, yeah.
Ideally. And I think most people would agree with that. I think any vegan would be easy to say. I think whilst they're hesitant towards actually promoting the killing of wild animals.
Wenn es keine Dichotomie-Frage ist und man hat eine dritte Auswahl, zum Beispiel die irgendwie sterilisieren oder sowas, dann klar. Also sterilisieren und irgendwie vegan ernähren und sagen wir, das funktioniert auch, dann klar, würde man die dritte Option wählen.
In order to protect other wild animals, they would all be in favor. If we had the technology to prevent it, they would do it. And it's just about now and obviously the most important thing here is creating a vegan world for humans, first and foremost, because that's a large number. But wild animal suffering is also a very large number. But I just think would you say that we should focus on creating a vegan world amongst humans and the animals that we're farming before putting our effort into that? Or do you think they should both have the amount of effort put into right now?
Well, the biggest issue I would say would
Man kann auch beides gleichzeitig machen.
be the animal agriculture industry.
Das hört sich ja schon fast so an, als würde er sagen, dieses Omni-Argument, das ist eines der ekelhaftesten, die es gibt, wenn Omnis sagen, es gibt andere Probleme, es gibt wichtigere Probleme. Alter, ist das abartig. Härter kann man von seiner Verantwortung nicht weglaufen.
I think that's the bigger moral issue, so that should be focused on first. And
Why?
pragmatically, I think that's the issue
What?
say would be.
Or do you think they should both have the amount of effort put into right now?
Well, the biggest issue I would say would be the animal agriculture industry.
Also,
I think that's the bigger moral issue, so that should be focused on first. And
Why?
pragmatically, I think that's the issue we could most easily deal with too.
Without
ja, das ist der ganze Punkt, diese ganze Tierproduktindustrie. Das ist ja das Ding, dass du das wirklich beenden könntest. Heute.
violence as well, most importantly there too. Like we don't have to
Beende mal das Leid der Menschen. Heute. Viel Spaß dabei.
instantly go towards being violent, and I guess that
Denn da bei Menschen kann man nichts anderes machen, als das Leid außer Hedonic Utility, also soweit es geht, zu verbessern, aber das ist auch nur ein Punkt, den du die ganze Zeit approachst. Du kannst ihn nicht von jetzt auf gleich beenden, aber die Tierschänderei, Tierzüchterei, Tierfresserei, die kannst du halt von jetzt auf gleich beenden.
that would be more preferable, and because it's so realistic and practical, it's such a simple solution. Like it's literally just eat this instead of eating this. I understand that. Anything more to touch on there? Is there anything you think needs to be more clarified when it comes to wild?
Ja, also das ist zum ersten Mal, dass ich den Typ jetzt höre, also länger höre. Ich habe ja gesagt, ich habe schon mal ganz kurz irgendeinen Take von dem gehört, dass er nicht okay wäre, wenn man karnivore Tiere tötet. Genau, und aber jetzt, ja, habe ich jetzt einiges von ihm gehört und ja, scheint, ja, ich würde mir ein bisschen mehr wünschen, dass er eine eigene Meinung hat. Ein bisschen mehr halt, sagen, ich bin dieser und dieser
Hey
Meinung.
guys, Mercy Wing 1 Griadre Eugen Mercy Wing 2.
Ein bisschen mehr standhaft sein und ein bisschen mehr kritisch sein. Der sollte ein bisschen mal Druck machen. Das ist mir zu soft. Vielen Dank, Flix, für 12 Monate fortlaufend. Dankeschön für den Vegan Support, mein Freund.
Animal suffering and the idea behind it, or do you think we really touched on everything?
No, I think we covered just about everything.
Yeah, awesome. Now, before we move on to making some carnivore diet arguments, which
Ach du Scheiße, die kommen gleich zur Ernährung. Ach du.
I really actually need your help with, because whilst I have a pretty strong idea of how I'm going to handle this debate with Anthony Chafee, I think you could probably help out with some arguments.
Oh, der hat eine Debate mit Anthony Chafee über Carnivore Diet. Okay.
I've actually already been speaking to Dr. Nagra and Danny from Lifting Vegan Logic, and they have some really good...
Ja, der hat schon mit Nagra gesprochen. Ja, well, wenn du Nagra an der Hand hast, dann wirst du die Debatte sicherlich gewinnen.
Have you seen the debate with Nagra and
Yeah,
Chafee?
he stomped him.
What did you think of that?
That was
He
just a brutal
absolutely
beatdown.
Whipped his asshole. Oh, it was so satisfying. So satisfying. But we'll save that for after a few more questions.
Ja, der hat in der Debatte ganz schön gebeutelt.
So I want to keep the topic onto vegans.
Und die Frau, die Moderator gespielt hat, die hat das Video striken lassen von Nagra. Erbärmlich. Danach haben die das irgendwie doch geklärt und hat er es doch hochgeladen.
And what vegans should be doing or shouldn't be doing. You're not a vegan, and I know you've spoken about this with Tash and Stefania, but you're not a vegan if you feed your companion animal products.
Lol. Also, da zu widersprechen, ey. Let's go, lass dich mal pressen, Junge.
Yep, that's right. If you're against killing animals
Niemand, der seinen Tiere füttert, ist ein Veganer.
for food, you should be against killing
Man darf als Veganer keine Tierprodukte über den Tresen ziehen und dafür Geld bezahlen, wenn es für Menschen ist. Aber wenn es für Tiere ist, dann geht das schon. Ja, genau. Da haben wir wieder Intelligenzbestien.
animals for
Haben wir ein paar im veganen Bereich. Ne? Ich habe ja mal ein Video dazu gemacht.
food for other people. That includes
Ja, well, die hat dann so und so gesagt. Danach haben wir doch ein Video geguckt von der. Und dann hat die gesagt, ja, die füttert ihren Kindern auch Eier und sowas. Weil die Kinder wollen Eier ausprobieren. Also ja, hat sich so und so alles erledigt. Die ist ja auch raw und sowas. Und da ist so und so immer Hops und Malzen verloren, leider.
your companion animals. So you're feeding your cat meat. You're
Ich habe ja auch mal diesen Raw Future gepresst auf den Eier-Take. Ja, und der hat gedodged wie der schlimmste Omni.
against killing animals for food for other people. That includes your companion animals. So if you're feeding your cat meat, you're a fake ass vegan.
Yes.
I can 100% guarantee there are so many vegans. It's hard to say that word after just saying this question, but there are so many vegans or animal rights activists at the very least that are feeding their companion animals. I mean, I was too for a while. It was a family dog, so it wasn't just or solely on me, and I was an early vegan at that point. But I instantly knew that what I was doing was wrong. And
Ja, das ist die Frage, die ich mir so und so immer stelle. Alter, du bist Veganer und fütterst dein Tier in Tierprodukte. Alter, wie siehst du den Fehler nicht? Was ist mit dir? Trink mal ein bisschen mehr Wasser, ein bisschen mal hydrieren das Hirn oder sowas. Also wie sieht man diesen Fehler nicht? Kann mir das irgendjemand erklären? Dir fällt nicht auf, dass du den Tiere fütterst? How?
instantly knew what I was doing when contributing to feeding our dog other animals.
Am besten so wie diese diese fake-vegane YouTuberin aus dem amerikanischsprachigen Bereich, über den Vegan Gains auch schon zig Videos gemacht hat. Die kauft ganze Schenkel und sowas. Im Supermarkt kauft die Schenkel und das ist Hundefutter. Und nennt sich Veganerin. Absolut fucking unbelievable.
Horrible. It's obvious. It's obvious. How can I justify feeding other sentient creatures that
Junge, was da im Kopf los sein muss, das ist beyond me.
deserve the exact same right to life as my dog, but I'm killing them to feed this many animals to feed one animal?
Ja, das ist der beste Punkt. Das ist der beste Punkt. Mit dem Punkt bin ich angekommen. Mit dem Punkt bin ich damals angekommen. Mit fucking Utility Calculus, in dem du hingehst und mal ausrechnest, wait. Meinetwegen nach Gewicht, weil die Tiere können ja viel kleiner sein als irgendwie eine Katze. Wait, okay, rechnen wir nach Gewicht. Wie viel Gewicht an Tiere lässt du abstechen, Also wie viele Tiere lässt du abstechen für ein bestimmtes Gewicht, um deine Katze zu füttern? In ihrer ganzen Lebensspanne. Junge, und da siehst du den Fehler nicht? Really? Was ist mit dir?
exact same right to life as my dog, but I'm killing them to feed this many animals to feed one animal. Is that not just common sense?
Das ist Absurdität. Ja, jetzt spricht das auch an. Wie ist das nicht, wie weiß das nicht jeder?
Yeah, you'd think it's common sense, but there's, again, a lot of phony vegans who will use these cope arguments where you shouldn't be forcing your pet to follow your moral views or it's not
Ja, genau, dieser Take, dieser dümmliche Take. Ja, das ist ja das Ding, ne, wo Veganer dann auch untergehen in der Debatte. Weil wenn du jemanden damit presst auch, ne, mit Logik, wird das Gleiche passieren wie mit einem Omni. 1:1 dasselbe.
natural for them. Just a lot of stupid bullshit. And it's funny, it's the same arguments that Carnists use to justify
Na gut, jetzt redet er mir aus dem Mund, als hätte ich das Video schon gesehen, lol.
meat eating, and then they use those same dumb appeal to
Vegans Brain Connected, würde ich mal sagen.
nature fallacy arguments to justify feeding their cats or dogs, meat.
Well, the common reason I hear is that they can't be healthy and you would actually be killing them if you were to feed them a plant.
Ja, macht denselben Case mit Menschen, im Menschenszenario.
Based diet that's supplemented, what would you say?
Yeah, so just thinking
Übrigens ist das schon wieder a posteriori Aussage, die du belegen musst. Get fucked.
sort of logically and intuitively, there's no particular reason for why you'd expect that to be the case. If you're giving them all the nutrition they need,
Genau, das sage ich immer. Ne? Und, das Tier, jedes Tier, genauso wie der Mensch, braucht einfach Nährstoffe. Und es ist völlig egal, wo diese Nährstoffe herkommen. So mein Take, ne, habe ich euch auch schon mal gesagt. Ich denke, die finale Ernährung des Menschen in 1000 Jahren oder sowas, die beste Ernährung, ne, die Wissenschaft hat die ultimative Ernährung herausgefunden mit AI, mit Hilfe von AI und sowas. Ist eine Ernährung, die ist 100% aus dem Chemielabor. Nur Kapseln und Pulver und Flüssigkeiten. Weil du ganz genau irgendwann rauskalkulieren kannst, genau exakt, was der Mensch in welcher Menge braucht. Also unterschiedlich von Person zu Person. Machst dann irgendwie so einen Test mit irgend so ein, keine Ahnung, legst dich irgendwo hin, dann geht so ein Laser über dich drüber, ne, in 300 Jahren und dann kann er dir ganz genau sagen, was du brauchst, welcher Menge und sowas, wird automatisch kalkulieren, pipapo.
why would you assume that they're going to be less healthy? There's no real particular reason why you'd expect that.
Ja, warum muss an diesen Nährstoffen ein Tier dranhängen? Ja, der Hund braucht diese Nährstoffe, die Katze, dieses karnivore Tier, braucht diese Nährstoffe. Ja, das braucht diese Nährstoffe. Warum muss an diesen Nährstoffen ein Tier dranhängen? Kannst du mir das erklären? Das ist genau den Punkt, den er hier gerade versucht zu machen.
Yeah, and the science to back that up.
Yeah, and then there's the
Ganz zu schweigen davon.
big surveys that have come out recently where people who feed their cats and dogs vegan diets,
Ja, die Katzen brauchen unbedingt Taurin. Taurin brauchen die, sonst wird ihr Urin zu basisch. Deswegen müssen die Tiere essen. Du gibst der Katze Taurin? Wer hätte das gedacht? Deswegen ist Taurin in Katzenfutter drin. Also zusätzlich noch extra.
actually have less health issues and they live about as long. So, yeah,
Nice.
we have enough data to show that it's not a health risk. They can be just as healthy, if not even slightly healthier. And yeah, you don't need to murder other animals.
Yep, und die Wissenschaft zeigt, die beste Ernährung für Katzen und Hunde ist eine vegane Ernährung.
To feed your pets.
Right. So you're saying as long as they're getting adequate nutrition that they need in order to be healthy, then you have no justification, really. Well, justification, even if you couldn't keep them healthy, it's still not a justification. But there's no excuse, really. But what about someone that says,
Schon wieder sind wir bei diesem, ja, aber sie brauchen das. Ja, schon wieder Vampire-Fall. Immer wieder kannst du mit Vampiren ankommen. Super Beispiel. Ja, Vampire müssen Menschen aussaugen.
yes, you can give them all the nutrients they need, but the actual macronutrients themselves, like too much carbohydrate or too much this, can actually damage them. So whilst they're getting the nutrients they need, the food itself is actually damaging for, say, cats or dogs or any other animal.
Yeah, so again, this food is specially formulated, and there's no evidence that they are actually getting harmed.
Yeah.
So it's just a bad excuse.
It is. It's just not reality, really. I mean, Tash and I both have vegan dogs. They're thriving, super healthy, super happy, awesome coats. You can just tell, like, super pink tongue. Like, even just from looking at them, you know they're super healthy, and we have the evidence to show, and anecdotes, not that anecdotes is strong evidence, but there are plenty of vegan animals out there that are actually living very long as well. Now you have vegan cats. Vegan cats is more of the hot topic. I think there's
Ja, wir haben nicht nur Anekdoten, wir haben Studien dazu. 3 große.
a lot more vegans accepting and non-vegan, well, not so much non-vegans, but they do accept that dogs are omnivorous and therefore they have the option. But cats are obligate carnivores. How could you be doing that? That's not even possible. I know we kind of touched on it.
Yeah. So cats are obligate carnivores. They need what?
Ja, wenn mir mal jemand mit not possible ankommt, es ist nicht möglich, die vegan zu ernähren. Well, dann werde ich ungemütlich, weil dann fange ich mit Modallogik an, weil das Modal Claim ist es unmöglich. Well, was ist der Widerspruch? Nomologisch oder logischer? Und dann, ja, wissen wir alle, wie das ausgehen wird.
Carnitine and some other amino acids to make sure that they're healthy. They but again,
Is it taurine?
yeah, taurine. You can just add this to their feed, so they're fine. Again, there's a big survey done both on vegan cats and dogs, and vegan cats, they're about as healthy. They live just as long, and I think they actually have less health issues in general. They don't have to go to the vet as often. And yeah, we have 2 vegan cats right now. They're both very healthy, happy. So yeah, if I ever end up adopting a
Das das krankeste, wirklich so krank peinliches Argument, was diese Leute dann bringen. Auf Feroz Khan wurde dafür übelst angegriffen und bis zum heutigen Tag wird er übelst dafür. Alter, wenn ihr euch das Video von dem anguckt, der hat ja ein Video dazu gemacht. Irgendwas da in den Kommentaren los ist, alter Schwede. Wie der da angegangen wird. Und man muss sich mal diesen Gedankengang dieser Menschen vorstellen, du musst mal fragen, was das Problem ist. Und diese Menschen sagen dir, was das Problem daran ist. Zum Beispiel Katzen vegan zu nennen, die sagen, ja, das ist ja Tierquälerei. Merkt irgendjemand irgendetwas? Sagt der Omni.
mountain lion by accident. I'm gonna feed that mountain lion cat food.
Is your cat around?
What?
If I ever end up adopting a mountain lion by accident, I'm gonna feed that mountain lion cat food.
Is your
Das ist nicht, genau, ein Video zur Modallogik. Ich weiß nicht, ob das interessant ist für Zuschauer. Ich könnte das in ein Debatten-Video packen. Debatten-Tutorial-Video. Was ich so und so vorhatte eigentlich. Weil auch diese Liste mit meinen Fallacies, die ist so ein bisschen, die habe ich ganz am Anfang gemacht, da sind so ein paar Fehler drin. Ich glaube, ich habe das in meinem Dokument sogar schon bereinigt. Ja, Modallogik ist, ich weiß nicht, für Außenstehende wahrscheinlich ein recht komplizierter Fall. Du musst verstehen, dass wenn jemand Modal Claims macht, also Modalverben benutzt, sowas wie unmöglich oder möglich, musst du verstehen, dass man nicht versteht, was diese Person sagt. So, ich sage jetzt zu dir, es ist nicht möglich, Auto zu fahren. Kannst du damit was anfangen? Verstehst du, was ich sage? Also ich verstehe das nicht. Wenn ich als Außenstehender sowas höre. Man kann nicht Auto fahren. Was? Wie kann man nicht Auto fahren? Verstehst du? Man versteht die Frage nicht. Man versteht das nicht, weil da etwas fehlt. Dir fehlt die Modalität. Deswegen sagt man, well, wait, es ist unmöglich, Auto zu fahren? Und die Person sagt, ja, wait, unter welcher Modalität ist es unmöglich, Auto zu fahren? Ja, das bedeutet, dass entweder liegt ein logischer oder ein nomologischer Widerspruch vor. Ne? Nomologisch ist alles, was nicht logisch ist. Also nicht aus der Logik kommt. Also nicht logisch, kein logischer Widerspruch, sondern physikalischer, biologischer. Ne? Und dann muss er den Widerspruch ausformulieren, was für ein Widerspruch vorliegt. So, ja. Könnte ein bisschen kompliziert sich anhören, aber ja, muss man ein bisschen reinkommen.
your cat around? Because I remember you brought your cat on last time. And he
Yeah,
was
they're
so healthy and strong.
upstairs. Yeah, they're upstairs.
Yeah, no stress. Maybe I can just put a clip in from last time.
Ich sehe in Debatten, sehe ich immer, wenn jemand Modal Claim macht, also siehst du in deutschen Debatten nie, siehst du nur in englischsprachigen High-End-Debatten, immer wenn jemand irgendeinen Modal Claim macht, dann ist die Debatte eigentlich vorüber, dann hat die Person die Debatte verloren. Die sagt sowas wie, ja, man kann Katzen nicht vegan ernähren. Und das war's. Und der Debater sagt dann, wait, man kann nicht, wait, ein Modal Claim? Unter welcher Modalität kann man das nicht? Was für ein Widerspruch liegt vor? Und dann fällt die Person komplett auseinander, weil die nichts mehr versteht. Und dieses Unmögliche nicht unpacken kann, also den Widerspruch nicht ausformulieren kann.
Because he was clearly, he or she, yeah, clearly healthy.
Das werde ich übrigens auch jetzt in Debatten machen. Also ich weiß gar nicht, ob ich das in Debatten gemacht habe früher, aber ja. Diese Modal Claims, Alter, das ist einfach nur zum Totlachen.
And look, I mean, this is the same for vegans. Strict vegans have to take a B12 supplement at the very minimum. It could be recommended to take iodine. You can get it from seaweed, but maybe not enough. So I would still recommend taking iodine. Maybe you could get into a few other supplements, but really,
Ich esse Nori-Sheets die letzten Tage, Lul.
we still have to take a B12 supplement at the bare minimum. So what's your issues with giving a supplement to a cat,
Yeah.
or a dog? It's the same logic, and most vegans would agree with that.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you're feeding a cat or dog, a normal sort of meat-based diet, their food is still supplemented. If you're feeding them, kibble.
Ja, diese ganze, du zwingst den Haustieren die Ernährung auf, weil sagen die zu den Veganern, wait, du zwingst als Omni deinen Haustieren nicht die Ernährung auf, die du für richtig hältst, Lul.
There's vitamins and minerals and crap added to their feed anyway.
Absolutely.
Ja, nicht nur kontrollieren musst, du kannst ihn wo ist der Widerspruch? Weil er sagt ja unmöglich, wait, da muss ja ein Widerspruch vorliegen. Man kann nicht Auto fahren, was ist der Widerspruch? Was ist der Widerspruch, wenn man Auto fahren könnte? Was würde dann für ein Widerspruch vorliegen? Also ich sage, man kann Auto fahren, du sagst, man kann nicht Auto fahren, wait, was ist der Widerspruch?
Probably more so.
Yeah. So it's just dumb. Even wild animal care experts, so people who keep lions, tigers, wolves in captivity.
Also du könntest sagen, welcher Widerspruch würde vorliegen, wenn man Auto fahren könnte? Weil man kann es ja nicht. Also welcher Widerspruch liegt vor?
They'll actually add, supplemental feed to their, dietary regimen because they know it's ideal for their health. Animals,
Why not? It's a reassurance.
Wild animals eat whatever they can get a hold of. They don't eat what's healthiest for them. So obviously, a diet that's specially formulated and supplemented is going to be better than eating just random carcass and guts and crap, whatever the hell they eat.
What's natural isn't what's healthy and optimal. No, it's just what they have access to. We have science on our side, and we can find what's actually best for human longevity and also non-human longevity. And if that involves using a supplement, which the science actually does point to that. I mean, there's people that
Supplements sind aber Gift, habe ich gehört. Gift. Das ist alles Gift. Gift.
you know Brian Johnson, that guy on YouTube. He takes over 100 supplements a day. That doesn't mean he's unhealthy. He's trying to do the healthiest thing he possibly can to live as long as he can. Whilst it's not practical
100 Supplements am Tag, ich nehme 200.
for everybody to be taking 100 supplements a day, but the science says that.
Ich warte immer noch auf ein Konterargument.
So you're either a science denier or you're not. So, and I guess this wasn't a question, but it kind of leads onto it a little bit. A lot of vegans, actually, before we do move on, if someone isn't sold
Medikamente sind keine Subs.
on the idea that cats and dogs, you're not a vegan if you feed your companion animals animal products, a really solid question that can help set it into people's minds is, would you feed your cat other dead cats or other dead dogs? Would you go out and kill them in order to feed your cat or dog? Most people would be like, hell no. That makes no sense whatsoever. You're putting the life of your cat.
Ja. Aber du würdest nicht Löwen verfüttern an deine Katze. Aber du würdest andere Tiere verfüttern. Hat das auch so ein guter Punkt. Holy shit. Da ist das fucking absurd.
Cat or your dog over the life of other cats and dogs. That just makes sense. Then the question just goes forward, just out of logical extension. What is the difference? And vegans should know this, of all people. What is the difference between other dogs and cats that you wouldn't go and kill and cows, pigs, chickens, fish? Common sense. I hope that's enough.
Ja, man denkt, das ist Common Sense, ne? Aber die Menschen sind leider von Natur aus fürchterlich logikavers. Deswegen sind 99% aller Menschen Omnis.
For people that are still feeding their cats, animals.
Ja, hatte ich Ahnung von Logik als Omni? Nee, natürlich nicht. Woher? Woher sollte ich das wissen? Ich war einfach fucking ahnungslos. Ich war ein ahnungsloser fucking Clown.
It blows my mind. It honestly blows my mind when I see other animal rights activists, not just vegans, activists, doing that.
Ja, es ist Absurditätenkabinett.
And then I guess that can just quickly lead on to, what about vegans that say a fully plant-based diet is the only optimal diet? What do you have to say about that?
A fully plant-based diet is the only optimal diet?
for health?
Yeah, so it's pretty clear that plant-based dietary pattern is ideal, but I mean the dose makes the poison.
Ja, Sonnenblume. Am einfachsten kriegt man mit von meinem Stream. Diese Benachrichtigung kannst du komplett vergessen. Am einfachsten, wenn du auf dem Discord-Server bist. Da schreibe ich das auch in mehrere Räume, habe ich das geschrieben, dass heute Stream ist um 19 Uhr. Immer 19 Uhr. Es gibt keine andere Uhrzeit eigentlich. Immer 19 Uhr. Also Sonntag, Montag 19 Uhr. Ja, eventuell mache ich sogar morgen einen Stream. Also um überhaupt keine Streams zu verpassen, ja, okay. Die Events sind auch problematisch, weil die aktualisiere ich nicht. Aber bei den Events auch, wenn du dich dort einträgst, Discord, der oberste Raum, bei den Events trägst dich ein, SEO reagiert auf Videos, dann sollst du auch vielleicht von Discord-Seite eine Benachrichtigung kriegen, weiß ich nicht. Aber ja, da starte ich das Event auch immer und dann leuchtet das oben grün, dass mein Stream läuft. Und ich bin auch online gerade auf Discord. Ne? Ich habe die höchste Rolle ganz oben und da ist ja so ein lila Zeichen, dass ich live bin. Also ja, kann man auf viele Wege sehen, dass ich streame.
Poison. If you have like.
Hast du einen Teamspeak-Channel? Nee, ich bin nur auf Discord. Ich bin Discord-Man. Ich habe einen ziemlich großen Discord-Server.
Dietary pattern is ideal. But I mean, the dose makes the poison. If you have like one steak a month, it's probably not going to make a difference.
No.
So, yeah, but plant-based dietary pattern, high in fiber, balanced macronutrient intake, somewhere between 20-30% of your calories coming from fat, around, 30 to 60% coming from carbohydrates, and again, somewhere around 30% protein seems
Lol, High Carb auch noch.
like ideal for.
Gibt's irgendwas, was Vegan Gains falsch macht?
Most people.
Yeah.
Du hast kein Discord? Oh yeah.
Yeah, and low saturated fat, low cholesterol, like that sort of dietary.
Auf meinem Discord-Server laufen, ja okay, nicht aktuell nicht 24/7, sondern ab 18 Uhr Live-Debatten. Jeden Tag. Bis 12 Uhr oder so. Manchmal laufen die den ganzen Tag lang. Debatten, kannst du zuhören.
Pattern's pretty obviously ideal, but
Yeah.
the dose makes the poison,
What?
so it's pretty obviously. Yeah, and low saturated fat, low cholesterol,
Oh.
like that sort of dietary pattern's pretty obviously ideal, but
Yeah.
the dose makes the poison, so you
Ah, du hast nicht auf dem Handy, okay. Ja, ich hatte es auch am Anfang nicht auf dem Handy, aber ich habe es mir auch aufs Handy geholt. Ich bin nicht drum rumgekommen.
don't have to be entirely plant-based to be as healthy as possible, but that's where the ethical argument comes in.
Ja, ich grante, meinetwegen ist 90% Tierprodukte die gesündeste Ernährung. Grante ich einfach. No one cares, rechtfertige Tiermord. GG Nore.
There's no amount of
Absolutely.
murder that can be justified.
Absolutely, I agree with that, and I've heard the numbers put out there. So yeah, a healthy diet is generally a theme. It's a one that is abundant in whole food plants mostly.
Ja, auf dem Handy auch. Und wenn du dann auf Discord gehst, leuchtet grün das Event, das gerade läuft. Müsste dann mein Stream sein.
That's high in fiber, has a variety of food groups in there: dark leafy vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, etc., etc. But that doesn't mean it has to be 100% to be healthy. I mean, I've seen
Ich werde eventuell sogar morgen nochmal live gehen. Oh mein Gott.
number thrown around there that if you are 75 to 80% plant-based, you're not going to really notice much difference by going to 85% to 100% in health, like in terms of long-term. I mean, we don't have the solid health outcome data on that, but I think it could be theorized or at least hypothesized that there wouldn't be a significant difference
Ja, macht das nach dem Stream, Leute, doch nicht im Stream. Der Stream läuft euch weg. Das Discord einrichten läuft euch nicht weg.
in health outcomes between someone that's 85% plant-based and 100% plant-based. That remaining 15 to 25% is ethical reasons, really. What do you think about that?
Yeah, at least depending on what you're eating. If you're eating
Yeah.
like sticks of butter, then probably would make a big difference. But if we're talking about
I mean in calories, really, if you put it. So like calories, even if it was 15% calories in butter, maybe you would start to see some differences for sure. There probably would be benefits of even switching that. But I think that's a loose number. But I think it's a good idea to have in vegans' heads, really, that we shouldn't be going around, because I think that makes vegans think that health is a good argument, but it's not. In terms of ethics, it's really got nothing to do with veganism. And someone could be eating animals and exploiting and murdering animals and still be just as healthy as you if they wanted to be. So it's two different things.
The health argument is like good to make if people are making up excuses for not going vegan, stuff like that. So, I would go vegan, but I need protein. You need to have those arguments available to you. But health isn't really an ethical argument. You don't need to be vegan to be the absolute healthiest, and health isn't really an argument for murder.
No, it's important to know that you can be healthy and that you can thrive as a vegan, but that's only just as a precondition for you to actually go fully with your ethics and not exploit any animals anymore. What if the science came out and said that we actually had to, in order to be long-term healthy and actually thrive and not die from some type of deficiency or health-related disease to do with diet, and you actually had to eat animals? If the science came out tomorrow, what would you do?
I would still be vegan. I wouldn't kill any animals.
Even if you're going to die 10 years, 20 years earlier than somebody that's eating animals?
So I don't see how that would be a justification for murder. Again, it's murder. So if you could murder a person and live an extra 10 years, would it be okay to, murder a person?
No, it wouldn't. That's a vampire's argument. And we just
Ja, da kommt er selbst auf den Trichter, sehr gut.
agree with vampires. I mean, you could just, again, always put yourself in the victim's position. If they're
Ja, ich bin absolut auf der Seite, dass du mit Gesundheit ankommen kannst, wenn du denkst, dass die Person vegan macht. Ich habe ja, bevor ich mit Logik angefangen habe ich ja immer mit Gesundheit argumentiert. Ich war die ersten Jahre Gesundheitsveganer. Ich bin durch Gesundheitsargument Veganer geworden. Ich bin ein Beispiel dafür. So, ich bin absolut dafür, wenn du weißt, dass die Person, das Wichtigste auf dem Planeten ist für die Person seine eigene Gesundheit. Well, of course solltest du sogar das Gesundheitsargument laufen lassen, definitiv. Ich wurde so vegan gemacht, ich habe über 1500 Erfahrungsberichte, wie ich Menschen so vegan gemacht habe. So, ich habe die Evidenz auf meiner Seite. Das Problem bei diesem Gesundheitsding ist, dass das Gesundheitsding nur ein Step ist. Du musst die Moralkeule danach schwingen. Und die Logikkeule. Weil ansonsten, wie hier gerade gesagt wurde, es kommt Wissenschaft raus, Tierprodukte sind die gesündeste Ernährung. Carnivore Diet. Und dann gibt die Person Veganismus auf. Ne? Du kannst einen reinlocken, den Veganismus mit Gesundheit, weil es ist die gesündeste Ernährung, aber du musst weitermachen. Du musst ihm Ethik und Moral beibringen. Oder für mich noch wichtiger Logik, weil aus Logik folgt ja so und so alles. So.
there were some other predators.
Genauso denke ich das beim Thema Umwelt. Ich denke, es gibt solche Umweltfreaks, die wirst du mit Umwelt vegan kriegen. Und du musst halt weitermachen mit Logik und Ethik.
That was going to be healthier if they ate humans specifically. You would not be okay with them eating you or other humans. It's very simple. But luckily, the reality shows that you can thrive as a vegan, and if anything, you actually live longer if you're eating a predominantly whole food plant-based diet. So it's actually a win-win in that case. What about vegans that advocate for reducing animal product consumption as opposed to abolishing it entirely?
Well, that's not arguing for veganism. You're arguing for some other bullshit, reducitarianism or whatever the fuck that is. But if you're going to argue
Reducitarianism, Alter. Wie sich das schon anhört, ey.
for veganism, you need to be
Bei Sklaverei einfach mal Reducitarianism machen, ey.
Arguing for the abolishment of animal products. If you're saying reduce meatless Mondays, that's not arguing for veganism.
Yeah, that's arguing for egg industry. Ich habe ein Video dazu gemacht.
Why not? What is the issue? If someone's trying to just reduce animal products, isn't that better than not doing
Ja, warum nicht Vergewaltigungen reduzieren von 10 auf 9?
anything at all?
So it's better than not doing anything at all. The problem is I don't see why you would logically think that saying, like, okay, why don't you eat meatless Mondays, why that would be expected to reduce animal product consumption more than telling somebody to not eat meat at all. If you're saying it's okay to eat some meat versus it's never okay to eat meat, I don't know how that's more I don't know how that's more of a powerful statement to get somebody to reduce.
Yeah, and also you're setting it up and saying that going vegan is difficult.
Ja, du machst einfach genauso und nicht nur das Argument, was der sagt, einfach logische Ausweitung auf Menschen machen, wie ich das gerade gemacht habe. Und dann siehst du das Problem ziemlich rapide.
something. You know, it's like saying, at least give this a go, a first step, because while you're making it sound, whether you say it or not, that to go fully vegan is a difficult thing to do, when really it's actually a very easy and simple step to switch out. Whilst it's going to require some basic research and learning a new skill, as with anything, that's not an...
Ja, du kannst so viel Angst haben vor Veganismus, wie du willst. Man wird vegan, hol dir bei Aldi, was weiß ich, A bis Z Tablette, hau dir das rein, wenn dir irgendwelche Filme schiebst. Gut ist GG Nore.
Excuse to be ever advocating for that. Would you say it's realistic to expect a non-vegan to reduce over time, despite you telling them that they should go vegan instantly?
No, I wouldn't expect anything from any particular person when I do outreach. So you're basically always going to throw shit at a wall, see what sticks. You don't know who you're going to run into. You don't know what kind of conversations you're going to have. You don't know the person's background. So I wouldn't go in expecting anything, but I don't know why, telling somebody to just try Meatless Mondays would be a more effective strategy to reduce meat consumption than telling them to just go vegan.
Ja, das Problem an Meatless Monday ist, dass der Konsum von anderen Tierprodukten hochgeht.
Well, you're technically still promoting animal abuse in that case, because you're saying, whilst you're telling them to reduce...
Weil die Menschen haben tatsächlich im Kopf, dass sie das kompensieren wollen, was denen so gesagt fehlt an diesem Tag. Und das ersetzen die natürlich mit anderen Tierprodukten, weil da ist ja das Protein.
You're still saying it's okay to continue abusing animals, because to the victims it doesn't matter whether one less is abused and exploited. There's still countless others that are still going to be abused and exploited. Even if it was just one animal every single month, it's still one animal that's being exploited and abused.
Yeah, like with any other moral issue like racism, we don't have like racist like racist list Mondays where okay, you can say the N-word every other day of the week, but on Monday you're not allowed to say the N-word. Like it's just not as powerful a message to say it's okay to do it sometimes. It's a much
Das ist so dümmlich, ey.
more powerful message to say this is never acceptable.
Absolutely. And this...
Die Menschen akzeptieren diese ganzen Logikfehler nur in dem Kontext von Tiere essen. In keinem fucking anderen Kontext akzeptieren die das. Nein, sowas kann man ja gar nicht machen beim Rassismus, Vergewaltigen, Morden, was auch immer. Nein. Aber beim Tiereessen, ja, da kann man das machen, da kann man diese Logik anwenden, ja.
kind of goes into the next question, and it's quite simple.
Ja, wie die Leute das nicht verstehen, ist unbegreiflich. Das ist fucking, it's beyond me.
Similar, but is it okay for a vegan to be an animal welfare activist over, say, an animal rights activist?
Logik ist der geilste Scheiß ever, den ich jemals encountert habe, ey. Vor allem, weil du mit dieser Logikbrille auf alle Bereiche des Lebens guckst. Das ist einfach nur lustig, wie sich die Welt dann wandelt, wenn du alles mal mit Logik betrachtest.
Quite similar.
Fun as fuck.
But is it okay for a vegan to be an animal welfare activist over, say, an animal rights activist?
No, veganism is not animal welfareism. Welfareism is not an abolitionist sort of perspective. Welfareism allows for animal abuse and exploitation and murder. Veganism is against that entirely. So the two concepts are opposed to one another.
Yeah, absolutely. So if someone says that they're a vegan, but whenever they go out and do activism, they're actually advocating for, I don't know, I mean, there's probably countless examples, but they're specifically going out there with a sign that says we need to end X practice, you know, like it could be cages, it could be this, as opposed to a solid animal rights message saying end all animal exploitation. How would you feel if you saw a vegan going out there and saying end live export solely, just live export? What would you say?
Well, tackling single issues is fine. I don't see that as taking a welfarist position. We do have to tackle single issues and tackle issues one by one, like, the fur industry, animal products, leather, wool, stuff like that. So I wouldn't say you're adopting a welfarist perspective by saying banning live export. Anything you do to whittle down the ability of the animal products industry to abuse or harm or make profit is going to support veganism and move towards the society that doesn't abuse animals. So if they're not allowed to live export.
Ich hatte übrigens vor dem Stream Subway Footlong 30 cm Vegan Teriyaki. Mann, war das göttlich mit Vollkorn.
That is a win. If they're not allowed to, treat animals a certain way, that is a win. But
werde ich mir aber nie wieder kaufen, weil es zu teuer ist. Der Preis ist tatsächlich wieder gestiegen. Wir sind jetzt actually über 10 Euro. 10,49 € kostet der jetzt. Absoluter fucking Wahnsinn.
arguing for welfarism is distinct to arguing for abolitionism.
Yes, yes. Yeah, so it's okay. We need, and I agree with you, that we still need to be going out there and tackling one issue at a time from a more pragmatic point of view. Whilst we can still go anywhere and have a sign that says end animal exploitation, go vegan, whilst that's a more total message there, it's not always the most effective in certain circumstances. Like if you're going out the front of Louis Vuitton, you can have a message that, and ideally you would tap that onto the end of the message, like end the fur trade, end the leather trade, and go vegan. Like that's a more solid message than just saying end fur, when you could include all three. But I understand some people also like to attack the low-hanging fruit, right? So they might just attack fur. I guess that's another question. What do you think about activists that will specifically not put the word leather into that sign and not put the words go vegan and just target fur?
Well, again, there's a targeted sort of tactic here where there's an opportunity to actually ban fur or get companies to get rid of, fur from their clothing line. And that's actually happened. I think Canada Goose has committed to not having fur in their clothing line anymore. There's been a bunch of other high-end, fashion retailers that have committed to not using fur anymore. So you need these sorts of targeted protests. If they weren't targeted and there was just this go vegan message, I don't think it would be as effective at getting rid of, something like fur. What makes welfarism distinct, though, is you want to abolish fur. If you were a welfarist, you would say, fur's fine, but just make sure they're not in cages. Or
Ja, das ist der lächerlichste Scheiß, Animal Welfare, das ist einfach nur ridiculous, was diese Leute da veranstalten. Aber es gibt Tierschutzvereine, die machen Grillpartys, wo die Tiere grillen. Habe ich actually schon eine mitbekommen, dass da eine ausgestiegen ist. Das kannst du dir nicht vorstellen, was da abgeht bei diesen Animal Welfare Dingern.
They're not killed in a certain way. Like that's the difference between, vegan activism and welfarism.
Yeah.
That's right. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the author, I've read his book, Gary Francione, he would say, from what I can understand, that if you're going out there with a sign that says end fur, rather than a holistic message, you are actually advocating for animal abuse. I'm guessing, based on everything you just said.
I would disagree with that. I don't know how saying end fur suggests that it's okay to eat meat or wear leather. I don't know how that...
Verstehe ich gerade auch nicht.
Here's a more hypothetical or even situational example of that, where let's say instead of Louis Vuitton being behind you, let's say the actual farm itself is there and you have leather being produced, so you have cows being killed right behind you, and you have the fur animals being tortured and killed right behind you as well. And then you went out the front of that and you had a sign that said end fur, but literally right behind you there. But it's Louis Vuitton, it's just that in this hypothetical world, they're actually doing it in person. In that situation, would it make less sense to just have an end fur sign?
Yeah, it might make less sense. Just optically, it would look really weird. Like again, if you were to have a protest in front of Louis Vuitton to ban leather, there's an expectation that that sort of activism will be less effective than banning fur. There's just a more realistic prospect of Louis Vuitton getting rid of, fur clothing or garments than leather, which makes up a much bigger portion of their, clothing lineup.
Sure. So again, this is really coming back to optics here and the situation that you find yourself in and what's going to make most sense for the people you're speaking out to.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to some carnivore arguments, because I think this is going to help me and I'm interested to hear about what you have to say. I think
Jetzt geht's los.
Specifically in the case of Dr. Chafee. He's a funny guy. He's a harmful guy as well.
Ach, über Ernährung. Ach, nee.
He's a pseudoscientist, to put it simply. He's a massive pseudoscientist. He makes, so I think if you're even going to get into ethics with him, ethics is almost like a write-off to him because he...
Ja gut, wenn du auf Ethics gehst, mit dem ist es so und so vorbei. Das kann er nicht verteidigen. Selbst wann kann ein Omni seine Position verteidigen?
He just thinks that plants are actually trying to kill you, so it's not even possible to be vegan.
Aber ich weiß halt nicht, ob der ein guter Debater ist. Keine Ahnung. Ich weiß, dass Vegan Gains den farmen würde. Der würde mit dem die Wand tapezieren.
What do you have to say about his whole argument that plants are actually trying to kill you, which essentially doesn't eliminate veganism as a
Oh mein Gott. Jetzt geht's los.
philosophy, but in his mind and to his followers, it's almost like veganism isn't even an option. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, I would ask him to provide prospective cohort data linking broccoli to early mortality. I'm sure he picked this up from idiots like Paul Saladino, and it's just a grift. But there's this idea that plants have some sort of toxins they produce to prevent animals from...
Ja, die haben Toxins, Pflanzen haben ganz viele Abwehrstoffe, Lektine, Phytine, was auch immer, die dich alle umbringen wollen. Und deswegen gucken wir uns Health Endpoints an und sehen, dass Pflanzen das Gesündeste sind, was du essen kannst. GG.
Eating them.
Ja, Pflanzen töten uns. Die haben Abwehrstoffe drin.
Okay, show us the evidence.
Und das ist ja das Lustige daran. Du kannst das ja alles granten. Du grantest. Ja, Pflanzen haben das alle. Ich stimme dir zu. Und wir gucken uns die Health Endpoints an. Und die gesündesten Menschen sind die Pflanzen essen. Es ist völlig egal, was die Pflanzen haben. Du guckst dir an, welche Ernährung die beste ist.
And so if you're claiming they're harmful...
Das mit da sind irgendwelche Stoffe drin, nennt man Mechanistic Speculation, nichts anderes.
There's the evidence showing people who eat more broccoli die earlier.
Here we go.
There isn't. People who eat more broccoli live longer. They have lower risk of chronic disease. So this is just bullshit. They're lying, they're making crap up, and they know it.
Where's your...
Ja, das sind so, vor allem dieser Jeff da, der ist ja auch ein erwachsener Mann. Wie alt ist der? 50 oder sowas? 40? Und dass erwachsene Menschen solche Sachen sagen, das ist schon, da ist peinlich gar kein Wort dafür.
evidence that shows that broccoli and plants are good for you, Richard?
Well, again, you can look at tons of prospective cohort data. You can look at the Adventist health studies. You can look at the Oxford vegetarian cohort. You can look at all these papers linking fruit and vegetable intake to longevity. And you can look at all these other papers linking, red meat intake to early mortality. So if broccoli is so bad for you, provide the evidence. And they can't. All they can do is say, well, I know some guy on Facebook who ate broccoli and his elbow hurt. So and then when he stopped eating broccoli, his elbow felt fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, but all those researchers that you just mentioned are bought out by religious groups such as the Adventists. They're bought out by, big broccoli. None of that.
Big Broccoli. Alter, peitscht mich doch endlich aus, ehrlich.
All of those researchers are compromised.
Yeah, so they're not. You can look up the actual researchers who are, commissioned to make these papers.
Ist völlig egal. Ich habe auch so meine Position sowas von hart geändert mit diesem ganzen fucking Biased und sowas und finanziert von und sowas. Ich habe das sowas von verworfen, diese ganzen Positionen, Mann. Du kannst ja die Daten alle angucken.
They're not vegan. You can look at the funding sources. They're not being funded by Big Broccoli. So, that's...
Sogar wenn die das sind, wenn die Methodology und alles stimmt, ist völlig egal, von wem das gefundet ist.
It's nonsense.
Yeah, and also in this...
Außer du gehst wirklich von Verschwörungstheorien aus, dass da Brokkoli-Wissenschaftler sind, die aus irgendwelchen Gründen Brokkoli promoten wollen, damit die Menschen gesünder werden.
Case, the argument could go the other way, right? It could say that there's big meat companies, there's livestock companies that are putting money into those researchers. Even in that case, that doesn't actually make the study a bad study.
Here we go. Nice. Der Typ hat ja richtig was drauf.
You actually have to look at the methods. You actually have to look at, can this
Here we go. Ja, der sagt genau, was ich jetzt gesagt habe.
be replicated, right? Is there something wrong with the methods and have they misinterpreted the results? You have to look specifically at the paper itself, and this is what it means to be a scientist. Now, people can pay, researchers have to be paid by somebody, right? They can't, it's expensive. So that's what it means to be a scientist, and Dr. Chafee, to put it simply, isn't a legitimate scientist. As I said, he's a pseudoscientist. He probably doesn't even have any idea of how to interpret a research paper. He doesn't have a background in nutrition. Not that he can do it, he probably could if he wanted to, but I think he has his own biases here that's preventing him from actually being honest.
Well, I think the guy is just an absolute grifter. I don't
Yeah.
even know if you can call it a bias. I think he's just grifting.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be said about him in particular. Now, moving on to ethics here. So I'm thinking in the debate, he's not going to agree with anything that you make. He's going to deny science, he's going to deny reality, and it might seem like you're hitting a brick wall. So I think at this point you almost have to set it up for the audience and just say, look, hypothetically, let's say that you did agree that you could be a vegan and you could be healthy. Or you could even say, hypothetically, let's say there was lab-grown meat that's identical to the meat you have right now. And then you can just ask him, what's more ethical? What would you say is more ethical? One that involves inherent exploitation or one that seeks to avoid exploitation? I don't know what his response to that specifically will be. It's probably going to be some appeal to nature or something like that. I want one that's more natural. I want to eat what humans have eaten in the past. Some bullshit like that.
Yeah.
But then he might also make the ethical argument that he only eats regenerative grass-fed cows, and that means he's only going to eat between I don't know the exact number, but I've looked at some of the research. They might eat between 1 to 5 cows a year, right? Okay. But vegans are responsible for countless deaths and crop deaths.
Ja, jetzt kommt er auch noch mit Crop-Deaths-Ding, Alter. Der haut aber hier alles durch, ey. Sehr gut.
So they're actually more ethical and are saving more lives in comparison.
Ja, das ist ja der Nico Rittenau, kommt jetzt hier. Nico Rittenau-Take. Nico Rittenau, der sagt ja, 2 Tiere sterben da ja nur und bei Veganern ja viel mehr. Von daher die 2 Tiere besser, die 2 Kühe. Und, ne, was für ein Unfall, das ist unglaublich.
What would you say to that?
Yeah, so he'd have to actually show the numbers for one thing. There's no way that he can eat 1 cow per year and that only equates to 1 animal death. He'd have to provide the evidence. If he's going to claim only 1 animal dies to, produce the amount of calories that I need to eat for the entire year versus a vegan that, I don't know, has maybe a few dozen animal deaths or something, he'd have to provide evidence for that, and there's just no evidence for that claim.
Well, let's say, I can't remember the exact number of calories you might get from 1 cow, but I think the number that I actually did get then, when you actually look at the number of calories you can get from 1 cow, I actually think that theoretically it would be less than 10 cows. If you're eating a large animal, I'll have to double check the numbers for you. We can even just say hypothetically right now, let's say it was less than 10 large animals per year to get sufficient number of calories. Would you then say that that's more ethical?
No, because one is systematic murder, it's literally a Holocaust, whereas the other is.
Ja, und diesen Punkt versteht Nico Rittenau natürlich auch nicht. Will er nicht verstehen, würde ich mal sagen. Also, was mit dem passiert ist, das ist. Aber ich habe euch gewarnt. Ich habe euch beim ersten Mal, als ich den Typen gesehen habe, wusste ich, da stimmt irgendwas nicht. Ich habe euch schon vor zig Jahren gewarnt. Hier kommt dann der nächste Konter.
Because one is systematic murder, it's literally a Holocaust, whereas the other isn't.
Yep.
Best, let me see. I'm gonna see if I can think of an analogy. Like, if you're driving a car, or if you have a society that's driving cars, you're going to have incidental deaths that occur. And I think on average in the U.S. it's something around 30,000 traffic deaths per year. 30,000 of those deaths are not as bad as 30,000 murders, or somebody points a gun, to your head and pulls the trigger. There's a moral difference there. So even if you could argue that there's fewer deaths, I don't know, like 10 versus 15, to produce the food you're eating from, a meat industry versus, plant agriculture, I would take the 15 deaths that occur in the plant agriculture that are incidental versus the 10 that are, straight up murders.
Yes. Again, then, just to play devil's advocate, and I know you just pretty much answered it then, so...
Sogar wenn du hingehst und sagst, die sind nicht, also mit Absicht, die sind aus Versehen, sondern die sind mit Absicht gemacht, wie zum Beispiel Pestizide und sowas. Oder Pestizide sind immer noch keine Rechtsverletzungen. Die Tiere begehen an deinen Property Rights Rechtsverletzungen. Also, ja. Da gibt es so viele Punkte. Ich meine, ich hoffe, ihr habt mein Video zu Nico Rittenau gesehen, mein neuestes. Und da habe ich alle Punkte von denen debunked.
15 incidental deaths versus, let's say, even more hypothetical, because I'm sure he's going to say something like this, 5 intentional deaths. Is that still not better when you consider the victim's position?
Yeah, so again, I would just analogize this to, would you rather 15 people die in traffic collisions or 5 people get their brains blown out by a handgun?
Innocent people deliberately killed, yeah.
Yeah, so I'd probably prefer the traffic deaths.
Yeah. It's an interesting question because, and you can see why they try to use it on you. And I'm going to give you some more information that will make this a lot easier to answer. And you can give me your opinion on that. But like, you can understand why they do.
Ich meine, wir würden sogar die Crops verteidigen gegen Menschen. Ne? Übrigens. Du brauchst da nicht mal Trade Equalizen. Ja, wir würden das sogar gegen Menschen machen.
Pull this argument on people. Okay, yeah, 15 incidental deaths, I understand it's not deliberate, but at least I'm killing 10 fewer lives. And from the victim's position, that's better for them. However, if we're really talking crop deaths, that doesn't account for the crop deaths, but the incidental deaths that are going to occur in cattle grazing as well, even if we're talking particularly grass-fed. Because those insects, those small animals, are living in the grass in a cattle grazing system. Cows are large animals. They're going to be stepping on hundreds of those potentially every single day or every week or whatever. They're going to be killing X amount of small animals, and they're probably going to be eating them as they are eating the grass. That's one argument to be made. But also, even in a grass-fed system, hay is often provided to these animals either for smaller parts of the year or even to a large extent, depending on the country. I don't know what it is in Australia, but hay would definitely...
Genau, Heu, ne? Auch so ein super witziger Punkt. Ich glaube, ich hatte das gebracht im Video gegen Ketzer der Neuzeit. Der bringt ja auch so ein Nico Rittenau-Ding. Auch Totalunfall. Ja, ihr Veganer, ihr tötet die ganzen im Feld. Und dann sieht man in seinem Video, wie diese Maschine das Heu für die Tiere holt. Ja, das Heu wurde doch vorher geerntet, oder? Oder ist das da im Lager einfach gespawnt? Ja, genau, wird genauso gefarmt auf dem Feld.
A mainstay product in a grass-fed system. That's a crop. That is the equivalent, and they have to eat a lot more hay than what a human would, right? Not that we're eating hay, but the equivalent, they would be eating a large
Also sind so viele Probleme mit dieser Position. Das ist einfach nur zum Totlachen. Da sind noch 3, 4 andere Punkte.
a larger amount. So all of that goes out the window when you consider that incidental
Ja, der beste Punkt von mir, den ich denke, der beste Konter dagegen ist das, was ich gezeichnet habe. Dass du im Fall von Nico Rittenau hebst du die Anzahl der Tiere auf der Welt an. In meinem Fall senkst du die Anzahl der Tiere.
deaths to a large extent occurring in a grass-fed system. And that's not even accounting for the number of cows that might not make it to the slaughterhouse or the number of predators that a farmer will kill in order to protect.
Yeah,
Cows?
deforestation.
What do you think about this? Deforestation.
Australia in particular has mouse plagues, and animal agriculture in Australia does, put out poisons to kill mice in these mouse plagues too. So.
Yes. So would you say that with those added facts, it kind of renders that argument a little bit more, defenseless? What do you think?
Well, again, based on the data that's available, there's nothing to suggest that there's fewer animal deaths in animal agriculture. So,
Yeah.
Und daran scheitert das alles.
yeah, I mean, you're going to get more animal deaths in animal agriculture versus plant agriculture.
Yeah. And from an animal rights perspective, would you say there's a big difference between someone defending their crops, their food source, their survival resource?
Ich habe ja sogar in meinem Konter-Video zu Nico Rittenau habe ich ja sogar den noch stärker, ich habe den ja gesteelmannt sogar. Ich bin hingegangen und habe gesagt, wait, wir machen es, ich verstärke dein Argument noch mehr. Wir sagen nicht mal die Kühe züchten wir, sondern jagen 2 Tiere in der Wildnis. Und nicht mal das kannst du verteidigen.
Versus somebody that is actually forcibly and deliberately breeding and raping animals into existence, enslaving them, commodifying them, and then murdering them in a slaughterhouse. Would you say there's a difference there, from an animal rights perspective?
Yeah, there's a difference between you shooting and killing somebody because they're about to kill your car and you holding somebody at gunpoint and making them pull your chariot and then they end up dying of exhaustion. Like, yeah.
Sure.
What's something else he might ask? I mean, there's plenty of things he would probably ask and put forward as a counter argument there. But I guess if you were to further this idea of incidental deaths that are occurring in plant-based agriculture, you could probably say that as we are changing the world towards veganism, right? We're creating a world that's prioritizing veganic farming over time, and we will prioritize technologies that would ideally limit the amount of crop protection and deaths that would occur during that process. Whilst inherently in animal agriculture, you will always have to kill and murder animals in that process, and they will only increase over time. And if he's advocating for a grass-fed system, it's not even feasible, right? It's just not even possible on our planet. First of all, I mean, that's a big thing. But would you say that would be a good argument to make, or would you adjust that in any way, that we can create a vegan world that aims to seek the reduction of animal killings during those processes versus their inherent killing that's always going to be there?
So, I mean, that's not a good argument in favor of plant agriculture. You could, reduce animal deaths over time, whereas with an animal-based system, it would only increase.
Yeah. So you mean that would be a good argument, because I think you said it wouldn't be a good argument.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah, that's right. What about the argument that you don't actually have to be eating crops? You could be eating other foods. So why aren't you, as a vegan, aiming to reduce the number of crops or actually eliminate any crops out of your diet and focusing on foods that would likely have less and less agricultural killings?
The foods that have the least agricultural killings are probably things like corn, soybeans, wheat, just because the amount of calories per unit of land are so high. So I don't know why you'd avoid things like that when that probably has the least amount of animal deaths. And secondly, you're not violating anybody's rights. So if they do happen to have more deaths, it's not a rights violation.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing a number. This is probably a very small underestimate number, but to get the same number of calories from, say, wheat or even soy, but even that's going to be very different as well as compared to, say, a cattle grazing system. You would need at minimum 2.5 times more land, but I'm pretty sure it'd still be a lot more. So when you're accounting for that, I think there was one actual study by a guy called Davis that you might have heard of before, and he showed that actually vegans are responsible for double the amount of deaths. But then when you account for calorie efficiency, it's actually closer to vegans are responsible for 4 to 6 times less deaths from that same study and the results that he provided.
Yeah.
But even then, I'm pretty sure that's actually a minimum estimate number, and actually is dramatically underestimating the number of animals that vegans would be responsible for.
Yeah, just the efficiency of plant agriculture, it's massively, massively higher. So you're going to have far fewer deaths and require much less land use as well.
Yes.
Especially when you're considering the fact that the majority of non-vegans are not consuming an entirely grass-fed diet. They're not only consuming plants, but they're actually consuming industrially grown animals that are going to be fed far more crops than any vegan would ever be fed. So his argument is, from the first place, not even feasible, because the world can't be entirely cattle-grazed, grass-fed, regenerative. There's not enough Earths, to put it simply. There's just not enough planetary space to even do that. And that's not even accounting for the environmental impacts that would probably have too.
Yeah.
Ja, den Punkt habe ich auch gebracht im Video.
Yeah. What other arguments can I expect to hear from Chafee?
Yeah, he's probably just going to blab about how nutrient-dense meat is.
Yeah.
Crap like that.
And how nutrient-deficient a vegan diet
Grant ihm das und dann fragt nach der Rechtfertigung für Tiermord.
is. Maybe that's a good question to ask you then. You, as a vegan, require supplementation. I do not require supplementation as a carnivore. Does that mean that... I'm just laughing because it's just fucking stupid, but does that mean that you should not be recommending a 100% plant-based diet to people?
No, I don't know why that would matter.
Yeah.
You can live a longer, healthier life while killing fewer sentient beings. I don't know why I'd care if I have to take a B12 supplement. You should also ask him how much he can bench, because pretty sure I can bench him by quite a bit. So
I'm going to bring up a bunch of vegan athletes to him, because whilst anecdotes aren't the great evidence, but I think from an optical perspective, it's actually really important to just bring up the fact that there are so many vegans thriving and performing at such a high level. And he could probably name close to no carnivores at the same level, really. Now, this isn't meant to be a strong argument. I think it's just meant to provide a lot of clarity and perspective to people listening that there are countless professional and non-professional vegan athletes. I mean, to name a few at the top, I don't know if they're ethically vegan, right? But from as far as we know, they are plant-based. And even if they weren't 100% plant-based, it's still a counter-argument to him who thinks the plants are trying to kill you. So, you know, there's Djokovic, there's Kyrie Irving, there's Chris Paul. I can't be for sure. These are like top level. There's, what's his name? Lewis Hamilton, obviously. And I've heard Djokovic recently speaking, actually, from...
Bambusa X gibt 5 Euro für gutes Karma.
Vielen Dank, Bambusa. Vielen Dank für die 5 Euro. Alter, ist das gut, den Tanz zu sehen, Alter. Macht gute Laune. Vielen Dank für den Vegan Support. Wo kommt das denn jetzt auf einmal her?
Oh, Partytime. Party, Party, Party.
Partytime? Boah, wir sind hier 2,5 Stunden im Stream. Party, Party? Wo ist die Party? Ich werde schon langsam müde. Das ist ziemlich lang, das Video. Sehr, sehr lang. Vielen Dank für die 40 Bits nochmal. Sehr lang.
From an ethical perspective, like whether he is entirely...
Wir gucken das beschleunigt, das Video, und wir kommen irgendwie einfach nicht durch.
He does bring up that he doesn't want to be harming animals, which I think that's pretty cool. There's people like Clarence Kennedy, who I think is fucking crazy. Like, wow, he's the next level, and he's in it for ethics, from as far as I know. He's actually doing it because he doesn't want to exploit animals. There's yourself, obviously. How much can you bench? I'll bring it up to him.
So, I haven't tested my max yet, but it's probably about 405.
What's that in kilos?
That'd be close to 200 kilos. That'd be like maybe 180, 190, something like that.
Yeah.
Last session, I just finished a workout. I did 315 pounds for 9 reps, almost got 10. And I did 350 for 3 sets of 5 the last session before.
Yeah, and if that's not a good reason that vegans can thrive, I don't know what is. It's such a silly argument that you couldn't thrive as a vegan, and I think what makes him less reachable and I guess...
Ja, diese ganzen Punkte mit den, ja, wie viel kann ich drücken, who the fuck cares? Was hat das mit Ethik zu tun?
I think he's going to be really in the minority to the audience watching, even from a non-vegan's perspective.
Meinetwegen können Fleischesser doppelt so viel drücken wie Veganer. Rechtfertige Tiermord.
Because even...
Einfach alles granten, was die Omnis sagen, und sie können trotzdem Tiermord nicht rechtfertigen. Das ist ja das Witzige. Wenn man das mal verstanden hat.
Most non-vegans would agree that you can thrive as a vegan. You can. It's an option. I just don't want to be one. That's typically what you would ever hear. You rarely come across people that are such a science denier that they think you couldn't even live as a vegan, even though there's one that's standing right in front of you for multiple years. So I really think in this case, the vegan isn't going to be the one in the minority. It's actually going to be him. I just find it scary that he even has such a big following. What do you think it is about the carnivore diet that attracts people?
Ja, stimmt. Mir ist eingefallen, warum heute auch so wenig los ist. Heute ist doch Tanz in den Mai. sind alle Party machen. Ich verstehe.
Stupidity. I mean, you can look at people like Alex Jones, absolute moron, claims he's in contact with fucking lizard aliens from another dimension, white elves, and you can contact them by using psychedelic mushrooms, and his dad was in the CIA and used a teleportation device.
Teleportation device? What?
People who actually follow Alex Jones non-ironically, and the guy's, built up such a big audience, he's become a mega millionaire. I mean, stupid shit sells. There's a lot of stupid people, and, dumb shit like this sells to a lot of idiots.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reality. Humans are subjective, irrational creatures. We base things through our own perspective, our own optics, and that's why we have science. Science is a tool to cut through the bullshit. And he's the person that's not using solid science. He has no high quality evidence to back up any of his claims. He only ever uses anecdotes and what humans have evolved to do naturally. What do you think about his argument that humans evolved to eat meat prior to agriculture, and because we've been doing it for millions of years, we should be carnivores?
Appeal to tradition. Achso, wait. We should be, jetzt ist da ja eine Wertung drin, also nicht appeal to tradition, sondern naturalistischer Fehlschluss.
From just that reason alone.
Yeah, so you can't just invoke evolution to say something's good for you. You would actually expect most evolutionary adaptations to favor short-term survival, not long-term survival. Yep. So if you've evolved to eat meat, so if you've evolved to eat meat, those evolutionary adaptations might allow you to live to breeding age, but they might not actually help you live as long as you possibly can. So you can't just invoke the theory of evolution to say this is healthy because of evolution.
What about Inuits? They live to an average What about Inuits? They live to an average age of around 70.
I think it's actually like 60 or 65, and that's not long.
No. Even compared to an average dieter in most Western countries, which is a really poor diet. So even then, they're of an average age less than that.
Yeah.
It's a pretty shit argument to make.
Yeah, and a lot of Arctic explorers noted that they're like pretty small, not particularly physically strong people either. So if he's going to make this claim, meat has so much nutrients, it makes you stronger, blah, blah, blah. Well, they're pretty small, not particularly physically strong people.
First of all, that's not even evidence. That's not even a counter claim or something to support the idea that you don't have the option to be vegan anyway. Sure, there are Inuits. They survive off solely animal products. Is that an argument that goes against the idea that you can be a vegan and thrive? No, it's not. So again, actually, this is a big one. He had a whole talk on it, which I can't actually watch anything of his more than 20 minutes. It hurts my head so much. But he has a talk that's the dietary guidelines are compromised. They're compromised. They're sold out. You can't trust them.
Yeah, so...
Du bist ein Verschwörungstheoretiker.
So there are industry lobbyists that do affect dietary guidelines, but those industry lobbyists usually come from the meat, dairy, and egg industries.
Right. What about plant lobbyists?
So, like, if he's going to claim the dietary guidelines are compromised from industry, they'd be compromised in favor of his dietary approach. So, yeah, and I mean, it's a conspiratorial argument too. I'm sure you can look at like industry funding and how they've affected dietary guidelines. What matters is whether or not the dietary guidelines are, for the most part, accurate or useful or
effective. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, he should be arguing whether or not that's the case, not looking at whose money is ending up in whose purse.
And for the most part, I think if you look at the stats, I studied nutrition at university, and if you look at the statistics, the vast majority of our population in Australia, and most definitely for the US or Canada, aren't meeting dietary guideline recommendations anyway.
Well, yeah, in the USDA dietary guidelines, there's actually a section showing the percentage of people who are actually following the guidelines, and it's very low. So these idiots who are like, oh, well, people are following the guidelines, but they're still fat. Well, they're fat because they're not following the guidelines. If you look at health outcomes, as we touched on much earlier, the things that are supported is a predominantly plant-based diet. There is a monumental amount of evidence. It's of researchers that dedicate their life to studying nutrition science, and the most common thread you will always hear, the common theme, is a diet that's centered around fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, etc., nuts and seeds. That limits saturated fats and overall red meat intake and stuff like that. What about his idea that saturated fat is good for you? The science says the science is confused. Yeah, it's not. So the only studies showing saturated fat is not related to heart disease risk are studies where the highest consumers are eating below 10% of daily calories from saturated fat. So the association between saturated fat and heart disease, it's not linear. You only see that association in prospective cohorts when dietary intake goes above 10%. So if you cherry pick a bunch of studies where the lowest consumers are eating like 3 or 4%, highest consumers are eating like 8 or 9%, you're not going to find an association. But if you look at prospective cohorts where that is the case, they're eating above 10% or randomized trials, you will always see with...
Wusste ich gar nicht, dass Vegan Gains da so tief in diesem Thema drin ist. Dass er versteht, dass man sich bei den Studien, die zeigen, dass da kein Effekt ist, dass man die falsche Stratifizierung wählt. Du wählst den Bereich, wo sich noch nichts ändert. Und dann, weil das halt nicht linear ist, da ändert sich erstmal nichts und dann ändert sich was. Man guckt sich diesen Bereich hier an. Lull.
Pretty much 100% consistency. Saturated fat is related to heart disease risk.
That's right. That's right.
Erinnert einen sehr an die Eier erhöhen den Cholesterinspiegel nicht oder Dietary Cholesterol hebt den Cholesterinspiegel nicht.
It's actually very clear science, actually. Whilst there is now science coming out to show that it actually depends, you can look into the different types of saturated fats, some being more at risk of increasing the risk of cardiovascular diseases as compared to others. But still, as a whole, when you're looking at these studies, saturated fat as an entire group, yes, once above 10% of total calorie intake, you're at higher risk for sure. Anything else you think I can expect to hear from Chafee?
Yeah, I would just get prepared with research showing, vegetable intake is positively associated with, good health outcomes. Get some like red meat research ready. He's a massive epidemiology denier. So, just be prepared with the arguments that like all research is correlational. So if you're going to say correlations, are meaningless, then he'd have to, discount all research, even randomized trials. So yeah, I would just get ready for the epidemiology denial crap and just have some red meat studies. There's just recently the Harvard study that was published showing a huge correlation between red meat and diabetes.
Yeah, and even when he's denying epidemiological evidence, what we study in nutrition, what we learn in university is that whilst experimental data is, yes, the strongest, and then meta-analyses is obviously the highest once you look at all of that together, epidemiology is really important in nutrition because it's actually very expensive and not practical to be doing experimental data over long term, which is very important when you're looking at a total diet. You have to see it over the lifetime of somebody or at least a very long period. It's extremely difficult to do that with experimental studies. And that's why we have to rely on epidemiology because sometimes it's the most practical and reliable data we have to use.
There's about a 90% correlation between results in epidemiological trials and randomized trials. So the research coincides almost all the time. You're not going to see very frequently randomized trials come up with completely different results to epidemiology. So clearly epidemiology is reliable.
That's right. And the question then goes on to say, well, what strong evidence does he have? Do you think he has any high quality evidence to back up any of his claims?
Yes, he has Facebook. People tell him that they ate broccoli and they almost died on Facebook. He also has ridiculous assumptions based on mechanistic data. Broccoli has some weird thing in it, and that weird thing, if you eat enough of it, will cause your penis to shrink, therefore broccoli will kill you. That kind of crap.
Yes. So essentially, he has no idea how the hierarchy of evidence actually works, and he's meant to be a scientist.
Yeah.
I think one good example to bring up there that I remember learning in uni was the whole vitamin A. There were experiments and studies back in like the 80s or 90s where, vitamin A specifically, in a supplement form, like vitamin A itself has health promoting effects when consumed. So what they did was they gave out vitamin A supplements to people, not realizing the toxicity levels, thinking that the more they gave, the healthier people were going to be, more health benefits, but really it actually found out that it was killing people. So that's why it's really important to study not only the nutrient itself, but also the effect that it's going to have on the body in food form or in a total diet form. It's really important over a long period of time. You can't just rely on mechanistic studies that show that vitamin A is good for you, therefore we should just hand out a shit ton of vitamin A to people because too much of it is toxic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Man, I think we've covered a lot today. When it comes to preparing for Chafee, I think my goal would be I want to get past the health shit quick because it's been covered. He was absolutely destroyed by NAGRA. It's been done time and time again. Well, not time and time again, unfortunately, but it's been done. And I don't really want to...
I've challenged him to debates multiple times, and I haven't heard of
I've got a great idea then.
Yeah, what?
I'm not going to post this until after, but I'm in contact with the host and stuff like that. And he's been wanting to get a third person on. He actually wanted to get Joey on initially. Joey can't do it. So then I spoke to Danny. He can't do it. Ideally, we'll have 2 people there because he's going to have a friend apparently. So it's nice to have 2 people live to going against each other. But the host is wanting to bring somebody in.
Okay.
I think I tell the host, can we bring a surprise guest in?
Okay.
Would you be down for that?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
I'll mention it to him. I can't be certain that he will
Klar, wenn Vegan Gains da reinkommt, dann ist natürlich direkt GG.
obviously allow it because he likes to be fair on both sides and he probably want to be clear
Ich meine, vielleicht ist es auch so GG, aber ich weiß halt nicht, wie gut der im Debattieren ist, der Links noch nie gehört.
about who's coming. But ideally, I'll say like it will make for some really interesting content if you make it a surprise guest. I don't see any harm in that.
Wir haben gegen Vegan Gains natürlich Hopfen und Malz verloren.
It'll be 12 p.m. my time, so Perth time on Wednesday. I don't know what that's this time, literally. It'd be exactly right now. Would you be available for that?
Yeah, sure. 12 your time Wednesday? That would be Tuesday at like what for me?
Whatever your time is right now.
Okay, I'll look that up, but yeah, I can make time.
I think you should make time because it would be so fucking worth it. All right, I'm going to speak to him. I'm going to get back to you on that. I so hope he does. Imagine Chafee sitting down and then we bring you in, surprise guest. He will love that. So
Ja, der Links war das, glaube ich, der gesagt hat, der Löwe darf das Zebra fressen, ja.
why has he been dodging you? What's been the case there?
Well, I think he's just afraid of me. Paul Saladino's also dodged debates with me. Sean Baker, he's also been dodging me. I've challenged them all, and they just dodge. I think they just know I'd make them look stupid, and it's just not worth the smoke.
Okay, thank you so much for this conversation. It's almost been 2 hours. I think we got a lot out of it. You helped answer and clarify a lot of questions, which would probably be considered hot topics to both non-vegans and vegans. And I'm going to get back to you and see if we can have you as a surprise appearance in the Dr. Chafee debate.
All right, that'd be sick.
Awesome. All right, man. Thank you so much for this.
All right, no problem, dude.
Sweet. All right.
Okay, ja, das war das Video. Sehr langes Video. Das war auch ein sehr langer Stream heute. Ja, absolut genialste Fragen. Also der hat wirklich, was hat er nicht gefragt? Der hat ihn alles gefragt, auch die ganzen Graubereiche und sowas. Genial. Also das war das beste Interview mit Vegan Gains, was ich hier gesehen habe. Der hatte ja schon so einige. Ich konnte manche gar nicht weitergucken. Das war so dämlich. Und übelst langweilig. Aber das war echt ziemlich interessant. Ne? Diese ganzen komischen Fragen da. Sehr, sehr nice.